The evacuation horn had been screaming for 4 minutes, and Oruvas Kasum was still trying to save the census ledgers when he saw the human girl walk toward the thing that had emptied the outpost. She was not running. That was the first wrong detail his mind refused to file. Everything else on Cold Hero Station ran: the Thessan surveyors, the squat Balamic loaders, the 12 armored sentinels of the coalition garrison, all of them pouring toward the shelter ramps with their throat sacks flat and their eyes wide as coins. The horn said run. 10,000 years of coalition instinct said run. And the small pink two-legged creature from the newly charted deathworld had her hands in her jacket pockets and was walking, unhurried, across the loading yard toward the shape at the fence line. Oru did not know her name yet. He knew only that the survey manifest listed 4 humans attached to the relay project as environmental auxiliaries, which was the coalition's polite phrase for people nobody wanted to sit beside in the mess. He knew she was young for her species, that she wore a canvas coat the color of dust, and that she yawned, actually yawned, jaw stretching, one hand rising to cover it as she crossed into the open ground where the Morvhan stood. The Morvhan. His mandibles locked. His ledgers slid from his forelimbs and fanned across the platform grating, and he did not reach for them. There are words in the coalition tongue for ordinary predators. There are separate words for the ones that hunt sapients. And then, alone in its own grammar, there is the word for the Morvhan, and it is not really a word so much as a sound the old Thessan made to teach their young where not to go. 6 meters at the shoulder. A hide like wet slate that turned energy weapons to warmth and nothing else. A head that was mostly the long, articulated architecture of the jaw, and eyes set forward like a thing that had never in the history of its line needed to watch its own back. The Coalition Threat Index ran from Class 1 to Class 9. The Morvhan had been given a class of its own, above the scale, and the notation beside it in every field manual Oru had ever read was the same 3 characters. Do not. Not do not engage, not do not approach asterisk, just do not. 9 survey teams had come to Cold Hero Flats to map the relay corridor. The Morvhan had unmade 4 of them across 2 seasons, quietly, completely, the way a tide unmakes a footprint. And after the 4th, the coalition had stopped sending survey teams and started sending garrisons, and the garrisons had learned to keep the walls between themselves and the flats, and to sound the horn the instant the long gray shape appeared on the horizon. It appeared perhaps once a season. It was appearing now. It had walked out of the pale grass in the flat noon light, crossed a kilometer of open ground while the horn wailed, and stopped at the perimeter fence, and the entire station had come apart around it like a nest kicked open. And the human girl was walking toward it with her hands in her pockets. Auxiliary, Oru tried to shout, and it came out of him as a dry click. He tried again. Auxiliary, the ramp, the asterisk ramp is behind you. She did not turn. She reached the fence. The Morvhan's head came down. Oru Kasum had catalogued the deaths of 3 coalition surveyors from the safety of a monitoring drone. He knew the shape a Morvhan made when it decided. The head lowered, the forward eyes fixed, the great slate shoulders rolled their weight onto the front limbs. He watched the head come down toward the girl, and he shut his eyes because he was a clerk and not a soldier, and he did not have it in him to watch a 5th. Nothing happened. He opened his eyes. The girl had lifted one hand, not a weapon, not a ward, just a hand, and laid it flat on the side of the Morvhan's jaw, the way you might steady a door. The head that could take a Balamic loader off at the waist had stopped a hand's width from her, and now it leaned, very slightly, into her palm. The forward eyes had gone half-lidded. And the sound coming out of the deadliest animal in the surveyed galaxy was low and rhythmic, and traveled through the platform grating into the soles of Oru's feet, and it took him an appalling 4 seconds to understand that the Morvhan was not growling. It was purring, or the Morvhan equivalent, a deep, engine-idle rumble that shook dust off the fence posts. The girl yawned again. She patted the jaw twice, the way one concludes a small transaction. She looked the animal over with the mild, assessing squint of someone deciding whether a piece of fruit was ripe. And then, in the flat noon quiet with the horn still going and half a station's population jammed weeping into the shelter ramps, she spoke to it in the human trade tongue that the coalition translators had only just finished cataloging, and the drone Oru had left running caught every word. "All right," the human girl said. "All right, settle, you're a big idiot, aren't you?" She scratched the slate hide under the jaw, the rumble deepened. "Yeah, look at you. Somebody let you get away with everything." She thought for a moment. "Biscuit," she decided. "You're Biscuit. Come on." And she turned and walked back toward the Habs with her hands in her pockets, and the Morvhan, threat class sovereign, above the scale. 3 characters in every manual. Do not stepped over the perimeter fence, flattening a 10,000 credit sensor pylon without noticing, and followed her at a heel like a thing that had been hers since it was small. Oruvas Kasum sat down on the platform grating among his scattered ledgers, and made a sound his species makes perhaps twice in a life. By the time the garrison commander came out of the shelter, the human girl had the Morvhan lying down in the shade of Hab 3 with its head on its forelimbs and its eyes closed, and she was sitting on an equipment crate beside it, eating something out of a foil pouch. Commander Seth Rukin Vale did not come out quickly. He was a sentinel of the coalition line, 4 times decorated, and he had been the one to call the 4th survey team back too late, and he carried that the way career soldiers carry things, folded small and never set down. He came down the ramp with his sidearm drawn and his shoulder plates raised, and 11 sentinels behind him in a firing arc, and he stopped 40 meters out because 40 meters was the number the manual gave for a Morvhan at rest, and nobody in the coalition had ever tested a smaller one and lived to correct it. Auxiliary, his translator rendered his voice flat and careful. "Do not move, do not make sound. Come toward me slowly and we will put fire between you and it." The girl looked up from her pouch. "You'll do what now?" "We have a clean firing lane," Vale said. "On my word the sentinels will." "You're going to shoot at him." She said it not as a question but as a slow confirmation of something disappointing. 40 meters, 12 rifles, into a thing you already know your rifles don't do anything to, and he's lying down, in the shade, next to me. She peeled another strip off whatever she was eating. "Talk me through the part of that plan where I don't get stepped on." Oru, edging along the platform rail to retrieve a drone he was already deciding not to power down, watched Commander Vale's throat sack work through several colors. The girl had put her finger on the exact center of the problem, which was that Morvhan hide shed coalition fire and Morvhan reflexes did not, so that the entire history of engaging one consisted of making it angry inside a shared space, and there had never once been a coalition soldier standing inside that shared space on purpose. She was inside it. She was eating. "It is a sovereign-class predator," Vale said, and something in the flat translation cracked, just slightly. "It has killed 31 coalition personnel across 4 survey seasons. It is the reason this station exists behind 3 walls. You have been on this world for 11 days. 12, the girl said. "And he hasn't killed anyone in the 12 I've been here, so." She stood, brushed crumbs off her canvas coat, and the Morvhan's forward eyes opened at once and tracked her and closed again when she settled a hand on its shoulder. "Look, I get that this is a lot. I do. But you've got a couple hundred scared people in a hole in the ground, and you've got a commander pointing a gun at the one thing on this whole flat that's calm, and I would gently suggest that the math there is not flattering." She scratched Biscuit's shoulder. The rumble came up through the ground again, and 2 sentinels flinched their rifles to their shoulders, and Vale, to his credit, put out a hand and stopped them. "What is your name?" the commander said. "Ren," said the girl, "Ren Alcott. Environmental auxiliary, which means I dig soil cores and I read weather off the buoys and nobody talks to me at dinner, which honestly, given today, I'm starting to think was a courtesy." She nodded at the animal. "This is Biscuit. He's new. We're still getting to know each other, so I'd take it as a kindness if nobody fired anything for a bit. Commander Vale looked at the small pink creature. He looked at the mountain of quiet slaughter lying in the shade with its chin on its feet. He was a soldier of 40 years, and he did the only thing 40 years had left him able to do, which was recognize a situation that had already resolved itself without his permission, and try to keep his people from dying in the aftermath. "Stand down," he said, "weapons low." Nobody approaches the animal, a pause, or the auxiliary. He holstered his sidearm, last of anyone. The coalition does not have a procedure for gratitude, and it does not have a procedure for a miracle. It has, instead, a procedure for filing incidents that do not fit existing procedures, and that procedure is to summon a registrar. The registrar arrived on the evening supply skiff, before the dust of the day had even settled, which told Oru how far up the report had already climbed. Her name was Ilanth Korsed, and she was V. Halu, one of the tall, gray, deliberate people who staffed the coalition's oversight branch, whose entire biology seemed built to make you feel that you had, at some point, done paperwork wrong. She came down the skiff ramp in a slate coat, took one look across the yard at the Morvhan sleeping against Hab 3, and did not break stride, which impressed Oru more than any weapon the garrison owned. "You are the clerk who kept the drone running," she said to him. It was not a question. Registrars did not ask questions they had already answered. "You will walk with me and you will tell me everything the recordings do not, because recordings do not have a sense of when a room is about to break and clerks do." She was already moving. "Your name?" "Oruvas Kasum, Cartographic Auxiliary, 2nd Class." He fell into step because there was nothing else to do with a registrar in motion. Registrar, the animal. "I have read the manual entry," Ilanth said. "Every citizen of the coalition has read the manual entry. Do not asterisk, 31 dead, above the scale." Her gray eyes moved over the sleeping shape without heat. "And I have now watched a deathworld primate walk up to it, name it, and take it home, all in the time it takes to boil a kettle. So the manual is wrong, or the primate is wrong, or the word asterisk impossible has been carrying more weight than it can hold. I intend to find out which. You will help me." They stopped at the edge of the light spilling from Hab 3's open door. Inside, the human girl was sitting cross-legged on the floor with a field manual open in her lap, and the Morvhan's enormous head resting across her ankles, pinning her comfortably in place. And she was reading and eating from another foil pouch, and paying the doorway no attention at all. Ilanth Korsed watched her for a long moment. "Auxiliary Alcott," she said finally, "I am the registrar assigned to your incident. Do you understand what that means?" "Means I filled out a form wrong," Ren said, not looking up. "It means," Ilanth said, "that the coalition has decided your existence is now an administrative matter. I have the authority to detain you, to quarantine this station, and to authorize the destruction of that animal by orbital means if I judge it a threat to coalition life, which, by every record I possess, it plainly is." She let that sit. "So I would ask you not to be flippant with me, because I am the only person on this world who can keep you both alive, and I would like to understand what I am protecting before I spend my career on it." That got the girl to look up. She studied the registrar for a moment with the same mild squint she'd given the Morvhan, ripe or not ripe, and then she carefully slid out from under the great head, easing a folded jacket beneath it so the animal would not wake to a cold floor, and she stood and dusted herself off and came to the door. Up close she was even less impressive than the manifest implied. A plain face, a chapped mouth, hair she'd clearly cut herself. She came up perhaps to the middle of the registrar's chest. She smelled, Oru's translator helpfully noted from the biometrics feed, of soil cores and machine oil and the human animal itself. "Okay," Ren said, "straight then, you want to know why he didn't kill me?" "I want to know why he didn't kill you." Ren looked back over her shoulder at the sleeping mountain. Something crossed her plain face, Not pride, Oru thought, and not fear, but something more like recognition, the look of a person seeing a thing she'd expected to see eventually. "Because I wasn't afraid of him," she said simply. "And where I'm from, that means something to an animal. It means you're not prey and you're not a rival, which only leaves one thing you can be." She shrugged. "So he decided I was that thing, and I let him because he's had a bad couple of years, and so have I, and it seemed rude to argue." "And where are you from?" the registrar said quietly. "That an unafraid animal reads that as an offer of family." Ren smiled for the first time. It was not a large smile, and it did not reach the tired part of her eyes, but it was the smile of someone who has been waiting 11 days, 12, for exactly this question. "Same place he's from," she said. "A world that ate everything that ever flinched." She reached back without looking and rested her hand on the Morvhan's jaw, and the rumble came up warm through the floor of Hab 3, and the 12 sentinels arrayed in the dark yard behind the registrar took one full step back in unison without a single order being given. "You people keep calling him the deadliest thing in the galaxy," Ren said. "Which, sure, out here maybe he is." She yawned, covered it, patted the enormous jaw. "But nobody who says that has ever met my mother's dog." Ilenth Kor said, registrar of the Coalition Oversight Branch, wrote nothing down. She simply looked at the small human woman and the sleeping catastrophe with its head in her lap, and for the first time in a career built on the certainty that everything could eventually be filed, she felt the specific vertigo of a category that did not exist yet. Behind her, Oru quietly powered his drone back up. He had a feeling the recordings were going to matter. The morning brought the specialists, because a coalition that cannot file a thing will always try to contain it instead. They came in on the Dawn skiff, 6 of them, in the sealed gray of the Beast Control Directorate, with cases of equipment that hummed and a portable pen made of the same field mesh the coalition used to hold Class 9 predators for study. The head of the team was a Balamic named Grishoda Toll, broad as a doorway and twice as certain of himself, and he came off the ramp already talking, which Oru would later reflect was the whole trouble with him in one image. "Right, where's the specimen? We'll want a clear buffer of 200 meters, everyone off the flats. I'll need the auxiliary who's been feeding it because that's a habituation vector and we'll break it clean today." He stopped. He had seen the Morvhan. It was lying in the long morning shadow of Hab 3 where the human girl had left it, and it was awake, and it was watching him with its forward-set eyes over the top of its own crossed forelimbs, unhurried, the way a landlord watches a man he has not yet decided to evict. Grishoda Toll had processed Class 9 predators on 11 worlds. He was not a coward, but there is a difference between the theory of the deadliest animal in the galaxy and the animal itself lying 40 meters away and looking at you, and the difference went into the Balamic's knees and stayed there, and it took him a visible effort to make his voice continue. "We'll break it clean," he finished quieter. "Today, where's the auxiliary?" "Digging soil cores," Ren said, coming around the corner of the Hab with a rack of sample tubes on her shoulder and mud to her elbows. "Weather buoy said the North Pan's drying out, so I've got about a 2-hour window before the crust goes, and I'd rather not lose the day." "What do you need?" She looked at the mesh pen 2 Balamic were unfolding on the yard, and her mild face went a degree cooler. "Oh, no, you're not caging him." "Auxiliary, the specimen is a sovereign-class threat and Directorate protocol." "He's not a specimen and he's not going in a box." She set the rack down. She did not raise her voice. Oru had begun already to notice that she never raised her voice and that the not raising was somehow the loudest thing about her. "You want to study him, fine, study him. Bring your scanners, stand over there and point them. But the second you put a wall around him, he stops being calm. And I would remind you that calm is the only reason any of you still have your throats this morning." Toll drew himself up. "You do not have the standing to." Grishoda, Registrar Ilenth Kor said, had come out of the command hab without anyone seeing her arrive, the way she did everything. The auxiliary has more standing on this flat than you and I combined, for the simple reason that she can stand on it and we cannot. Deploy your scanners. Leave the pen folded. If you would like to argue the point, I invite you to walk it out to the animal and make your case to it directly. Nobody deployed the pen. They deployed the scanners instead, a ring of them at the 200-meter line. And for the rest of the morning, the Beast Control Directorate stood behind their instruments and measured the Morvhon, while the Morvhon ignored them and watched the girl dig soil cores at the edge of the North Pan. And the readings that came back broke 3 of their machines and one of their long-held assumptions. Oru was there when Toll read the density figures off the scanner, because Ilanth had attached Oru to herself as a kind of institutional memory, and he had given up resisting it. The Balamic's broad face had gone the flat gray of a man recalculating a thing he'd staked a career on. "That's no," Toll tapped the readout. "That's a fault, run it again." Nothing masses that against that skeletal frame. The metabolic load alone would. "It ran 3 times," said his Thessan technician. "It's not a fault. Grishoda, the hide's not armor, it's not plating, it's the animal, all the way through. There's no soft interior to reach. She searched for the word, it's dense the way a tool is dense. There's nowhere on it that isn't the weapon." Toll was quiet for a while. "How does it move?" he said finally to no one. "How does a thing built like that move at all?" "Fast," Wren called, without looking up from her core samples, 200 meters away, which meant either the human hearing was better than the manifest claimed, or she had simply guessed the shape of the conversation. "He moves fast." "You want to see?" She stood, stretched her back, and whistled 2 notes, low, casual, the whistle a person uses to call a thing in from a yard. The Morvhon came off the ground. Oru had watched the drone footage of the surveyors. He knew, intellectually, that the animal was fast. But there is knowing, and there is the 6-meter gray shape going from lying down to full extension across 90 meters of open pan, in a span of time that his eye simply refused to divide into moments. A single gray line drawn across the noon light, and then it was standing beside the girl, having crossed the distance faster than the sound of her whistle had finished leaving the air, and it had not disturbed a single one of her sample tubes. It stood over her, vast, and lowered its head, and she scratched it under the jaw and said, "Good, okay, good, lie down, you're blocking my light." And it folded itself down into the dust beside her soil cores like a hound at a hearth. The entire Beast Control Directorate had gone to the ground behind their scanners. Toll was the last one up. When he rose, he did not reach for the folded pen again. Oru watched him look at it and look at the animal, and quietly nudged the pen behind an equipment case with his foot, where he would not have to keep seeing the size of his mistake. "Registrar," Toll said, "I'd like to amend my report." "I imagine you would," said Ilanth. The report Toll amended went up the coalition ladder. And 3 days later the coalition ladder sent down the thing it always sends when it wants a problem to have a bigger, more expensive answer. It sent a champion. The champion arrived on a military lander, escorted in a reinforced containment sled. And it was, Oru understood the moment the sled doors opened, meant to be the counterargument to the human girl. Its name, the coalition did name these ones, was Karakoth, and it was a Vaskaran warhound, the apex battle beast of the coalition's own frontier, bred across 9 generations from the deadliest predators the coalition had ever managed to leash. 4 meters at the shoulder, armored in grown ceramic plate, trained to kill on a whistle and to die on command. It had broken a rebel line on Thesand and cleared a nest world of its native predators single-handed, and its handlers walked it out onto Cold Hero Flats on a chain-of-office leash, with the specific swagger of men who have brought the biggest thing in the room to a room they intend to own. The Directorate's assessment is that the sovereign specimen responds to dominance, the lead handler announced to the assembled station. He was a sentinel officer, sleek, and he spoke to the crowd rather than to Ilanth, which told Oru whose idea this had been. The auxiliary's control is an accident of the animal's temporary docility. We will now establish a proper hierarchy. Karakoth will assert dominance over the specimen, after which the specimen becomes a coalition military asset under trained handlers, and the auxiliary arrangement ends. He nodded to his men. Bring it up. Wren was sitting on her equipment crate with a mug of something hot, and Biscuit was lying beside her with his chin on her boot, and she watched the 4-meter armored warhound come stalking across the flats, toward them with an expression Oru could only describe as tired. "You really want to do this," she said, not to the handler, to the sky generally. "Okay, okay." She set her mug down carefully on the crate where it wouldn't spill. She put one hand flat on Biscuit's shoulder, not to rouse him, Oru realized later, but to keep him down, to hold him. "Easy," she said quietly. "Easy, leave it. This one's not for you." The Morvhan had opened its eyes. Karakoth came on. It was a magnificent animal, and it knew its business. It fanned wide, it lowered its armored head. It made the deep concussive challenge cough that had frozen infantry lines on 2 worlds, and every alien in the yard felt the old prey reflex go down their spines like cold water. It was built and bred and trained to be the most frightening thing any living creature would ever face. It got within 30 meters of the Morvhan before the bred 9 generations of coalition conditioning met something older than conditioning and lost. Oru saw the exact moment. The warhound's charge did not slow, it stopped. All 4 armored limbs locking, ceramic claws tearing furrows in the pan as 2 tons of trained aggression tried to become stillness in a single stride. Its head, which had been lowered to challenge, dropped further and kept dropping, until the armored jaw was nearly in the dust. The concussive cough died in its throat and came back out as something no coalition handler had ever heard from a Vaskaran warhound. A high, thin keen. The sound of an animal that has just understood, in the wordless certain way of animals, precisely where it falls in an order it did not know existed. Biscuit had not moved, he had not risen. He had lifted his head off Wren's boot perhaps a hand's width, and turned his forward eyes on the warhound, and let out one short breath through the great architecture of his jaw. Not a roar, not a challenge, barely a sound at all, and the effect on Karakoth was the effect of a landslide on a pebble. The warhound lowered itself fully to the ground. It rolled its armored shoulder down and exposed the soft plating of its throat to the dust, the ancient gesture, the oldest sentence in the grammar of predators. "You are above me, I concede. I am not a threat." Then it belly-crawled the last 20 meters, past its own stunned handlers, past the frozen sentinels, and it laid its enormous armored head down beside the Morvhan's forelimbs and went still. And Biscuit put his chin back on Wren's boot and closed his eyes, and the whole thing, from challenge cough to surrender, had taken perhaps 9 seconds. Nobody spoke for a while. Wren picked her mug back up, she sipped. She looked at the sleek sentinel handler, who had not moved, whose chain of office leash hung slack from his hand with nothing on the end of it that would answer to it any more. "So that's your warhound sorted," she said. "You want him back, or is he ours now too?" The handler did not answer. He was looking at Karakoth, his warhound, the coalition's finest, the counter-argument lying in the dust with its throat bared to an animal that had barely opened its eyes, and Oru watched the specific thing happen in the sentinel's face that happens to a man when the biggest thing he owns turns out to be small. Karakoth stayed. That was the part the reports could never quite explain afterward. When the handlers tried to walk the warhound back to its sled that evening, it would not go. It planted its armored bulk in the shadow of Hab 3 meters from the Morvhan, and it looked at its handlers with an expression they had never trained into it and would never train out, and after an hour of trying they left it there, because there is no protocol for retrieving a thing that has found a god. By morning there were 2 apex predators sleeping in the yard of Cold Hero Station, and the human girl was between them with a mug of something hot, reading her field manual, and she had named the warhound too. She'd named it Custard. It was the naming that undid the coalition in the end. Not the deaths, not the density readings, not even the Warhound's surrender. It was the names. Because a coalition can file a threat, it has 10,000 years of practice filing threats. The whole grim machinery of the Beast Control Directorate exists to take a thing that kills you and reduce it to a class, a buffer distance, a protocol, a line in a manual that says do not. What the machinery cannot do, what it has no gear for at all, is process a sovereign-class predator whose name is Biscuit. Oru watched it happen to the personnel of Cold Hero one at a time. The word did something to them. You could hold the fear of the Morvhan as long as it was the Morvhan. The fear had a shape, and the shape had a name that was really a sound your grandmother made to keep you from the flats. But once the small pink creature had leaned on its jaw and called it Biscuit, the sound came apart. You would see a sentinel look at the sleeping mountain, and you would watch him try to hold the old terror and fail. Because the thing about a name like Biscuit is that it insists the thing wearing it is knowable, is ordinary, is somebody's. And a thing that is somebody's cannot also be the unnameable dark at the edge of the flats. The two facts would not fit in the same head. And every time they failed to fit, a little more of the coalition's certainty leaked out of the crack between them. Registrar Ilanth Kaur said understood this before anyone, which was why she was a registrar. Oru found her that evening at the edge of the yard, watching Ren throw a length of habstrut across the flats, and watching the Morvhan flow out after it, 60 meters 90, a gray line across the dusk, to catch the strut in the air and bring it back and lay it at the girl's feet and stand there, vast and expectant, tailless hindquarters somehow managing to convey the exact posture of a thing that wants you to throw it again. She's playing fetch, Ilanth said, with the deadliest animal in the surveyed galaxy. Yes, Registrar. The Directorate spent 4 survey seasons and 31 lives learning it could not be contained. She watched the strut go out again, watched the gray line pour after it. And she is going to make it sit. I believe she already has, Registrar. Ilanth was quiet for a moment. In the failing light, her gray V-hollow face was hard to read, but Oru had spent enough days at her side now to catch the thing underneath the stillness, and the thing underneath the stillness was not fear and was not anger. It was closer to grief, the specific grief of a person whose entire life has been built on the load-bearing belief that the universe is orderly, watching that belief hold up a weight it was never rated for. Write it down, clerk, she said finally. All of it, the fetch, the names, the Warhound. She turned to go in. Someone will come who wants this to have been a weapon and a hierarchy and a coalition asset. And when they do, the only thing standing between that girl and a very tidy tragedy is going to be an accurate record kept by someone nobody talks to at dinner. A pause. You will keep it well. Yes, Registrar, said Oruvas Kasum, and he did. Prefect Davin Ashatro arrived on the 10th day, and he arrived angry, which Oru would come to understand was the prefect's resting state and also his method. He was Korvani, one of the sharp, small-featured, quick-moving people who ran the coalition's colonial administration, and he had come out to Cold Hero from the sector seat with an escort of his own oversight staff, and a mandate that he made sure everyone heard within the first hour. The Cold Hero relay corridor was 3 seasons behind schedule. 3 seasons of missed contract windows, of a strategic communications spine left unbuilt, of a sector office answering uncomfortable questions from a coalition that did not like to be told a project had stalled because of an animal. Davin Ashatro had built his career on making stalled projects unstall, and he had not made that career by being sentimental about what got moved out of the way. I have read the reports, he told the assembled staff of Cold Hero Station, standing on the command hab ramp so that he could look down at them. I have read about the density figures and the Warhound and the games. His small features pinched on the word. And I have read, between the lines, the thing none of you will write plainly, which is that the Survey Corps of the Coalition has been held hostage on this flat by a single animal for 3 seasons, and that you have now decided to solve that by pretending the animal is a pet. He let his gaze move across them. It is not a pet. It is 31 dead, and I am not here to name it. I am here to open the corridor. And how, said Ilanth Corsaid from the back, without raising her voice, do you propose to do that, Prefect? The Prefect had not known the Registrar was present. Oru saw the small recalculation move through him. A Registrar outranked a Prefect in matters of incident, though not in matters of schedule, and the two of them would now spend some days establishing exactly where the border of the incident lay. But Davin Ashatro had not built his career by losing the first exchange. Orbital sanitation, he said. 1 pass. The corridor is 140 kilometers of open flat. The animal ranges the whole of it. A single orbital strike wide pattern resolves a 3-season delay in an afternoon. The auxiliary's attachment is unfortunate, but she is 1 civilian contractor, and the animal is not a citizen, and 31 of ours are dead. He spread his sharp hands. I am not a monster, Registrar. I am an administrator. I am simply able to do the arithmetic that the rest of you have talked yourselves out of. The word arithmetic reached Ren Alcott at the back of the crowd, where she had been standing with mud on her knees and Biscuit's shoulder against her hip, and Oru watched her go very still in a way that had nothing to do with the animal. You want to drop a strike on the flats, she said. I want to open a corridor, auxiliary. With him in it. With the threat in it, yes. Ren looked at the Prefect for a long moment. Then she did a thing Oru had not seen her do before. She stepped in front of the animal. Not behind it, not beside it, in front, putting her small pink body between the sharp-featured Corvani and the 6 meters of slate that could have crossed the distance faster than thought, and the meaning of it landed on the whole yard at once. She was not protecting herself from the animal. She was protecting the animal from them. Say the rest of it, she said quietly. Say the part where you're 140 kilometers of flat and 1 contractor away from your bonus, and the only thing in your road is a girl and her dog. Say that part out loud, Prefect, and let's all hear how it sounds. The Prefect's throat membrane flushed. It is not a dog. He's whatever I say he is, Ren said. That's kind of the whole thing you keep missing. And she turned her back on him, on a Prefect of the Coalition, in front of his staff, and walked out into the flats with the Morvhan falling in at her heel, and the Warhound rising from the shade to fall in behind them both. And Davin Ashatro was left standing on the ramp, having been dismissed by an environmental auxiliary, in front of the people whose respect his entire method depended on. He did not forget it. Oru made a private note, in the record Ilanth had told him to keep, that the Prefect did not forget it, and underlined the note twice. Out on the flats, past the last sensor pylon, where the pale grass ran to the heat shimmer and there was nobody to perform for, Ren Alcott sat down on a weathered outcrop and put her face in her hands for a while, and the Morvhan lay down against her back, so that she was leaning on the warm slate flank of the deadliest animal in the galaxy, and the Warhound arranged its armored bulk to block the wind, and for a few minutes the girl let herself not be calm. She was 23. She had grown up on Havery, which the Coalition charts marked with the same clipped notation they used for Cold Hero. Deathworld, restricted, environmental hazard, general asterisk, and which the people who lived there just called home. On Havery the grass had teeth, and the rivers ran 3 directions depending on the season, and the smallest predator in the equatorial band could open a supply drum. And Ren had learned before she could properly walk the first and only law that a deathworld teaches its children, which was this. You cannot be the fastest thing, and you cannot be the strongest thing, and you cannot be the thing with the most teeth, so you had better learn to be the thing that does not panic, because panic is what the world is built to eat. Her mother had kept dogs, real Earth dogs, 6 generations off the colony ship, big rangy mongrels bred back toward wolf by the demands of the place, and the dogs had taught Wren the second law, which was that an animal does not follow the loudest creature or the biggest creature. It follows the one that is not afraid. The one whose stillness says, "I have already decided how this ends, and it ends fine, and you may rest." Wren had watched her mother stop a charging thresher boar with nothing but a lowered voice and a flat hand, and the absolute refusal to flinch, and she had understood, at 6 years old, that this was the only real power there was, not the power to win a fight, but the power to be so unbothered that the fight never started. She had not expected to need it out here. She had signed onto the Cold Hero project because it paid, because it was far, because after her mother died there had been nothing on Havery but the dog's empty runs, and she had needed to be somewhere that did not have her mother's shape cut out of every room. She had come to read weather off buoys and dig soil cores and be the person nobody talked to at dinner, and she had been fine with that. She had been looking forward to the quiet. And then on the 11th day the horn had gone, and everyone had run, and she had walked out into the flats because she had recognized, the way you recognize a face, the exact quality of the thing standing at the fence. An apex animal, alone, unchallenged for so long that it had forgotten there was any other way to be, and underneath the terror it threw off in every direction, something her mother's dogs had had in their eyes on the bad nights. The particular loneliness of a thing that has never once in its life met an equal and has stopped hoping to. She had known that loneliness. She had been living inside it since the funeral. And so she had walked up to the deadliest animal in the surveyed galaxy and put her hand on its jaw, not because she was brave, but because she was tired in exactly the way it was tired, and it had felt that, the way animals feel everything, and it had leaned into her hand. "They want to drop a strike on you," she told it now, out on the flats where nobody could hear. The Morvhan rumbled against her spine. "Yeah, I know, I won't let them." She scratched the great jaw. "I don't actually know how I'm going to stop them, but I won't let them." My mother didn't raise a flincher. She wiped her face on her sleeve and stood up, and put the calm back on the way you put a coat back on, and turned and walked the animals home, and by the time the station came back into view she was, once again, only a girl with mud on her knees, and nobody who saw her return would have guessed she had let anything crack at all. While the prefect and the registrar circled each other over the border of the incident, the rest of Cold Hero Station was quietly doing something that neither of them had authorized and that neither could have stopped. It was falling in love with the routine. It started, as these things do, with the mess. Wren fed the animals at the same 2 times each day, a haunch of ration protein each, thawed and set down on a flat rock she dragged into the yard for the purpose. And she did it the same way every time, a low 2-note whistle, a flat hand, the food down, a step back, asterisk wait, and then a quiet okay that released them to eat. And the Balamic cooks who had watched this from the mess window in frank terror for the first 3 days began, around the 5th, to save the best of the ration protein for the flat rock, unasked. Nobody discussed it. It simply became true that the 2 apex predators of Cold Hero flats ate better than the garrison, and that a Balamic cook named Oddick would grow visibly anxious if the delivery ran late, and would stand at the window until the whistle went and the food went down and the girl said, "Okay," and only then return to his own work, settled, as if some rightness in the shape of the day had been confirmed. Oru catalogued it because Ilanth had told him to catalog everything, but he found, to his own discomfort, that he was cataloging it with something other than a clerk's detachment. He had started saving the crust ends of his morning meal. He did not entirely know why. He told himself it was for the record. The whistle came next. Wren's 2-note call to bring the animals in. It was nothing. A scrap of tune, the sort of thing a person does without thinking, and within a week Oru caught a young sentinel practicing it under his breath at the perimeter, getting the interval wrong, trying again. By the end of the week half the garrison could do it, and none of them would have been able to say why they'd learned, and all of them stood a fraction straighter when Wren did it for real, and the gray line poured in from the flats to sit at her feet. It had become, without anyone deciding, the sound the station organized itself around. When the whistle went, work paused. Heads came up. The day had a spine again. And then Grish showed a toll, the same Balamic who had come off the skiff meaning to break the habituation vector, wrote the doctrine. He did not mean to write doctrine. He meant to write a directorate technical annex, a dry supplement to the specimen file, and it began that way. Observed handler protocol, auxiliary W Alcott, feeding sequence, ref, sovereign class specimen. But Toll was a careful animal himself, and the more he watched the girl's flat hand and her asterisk weight and her quiet asterisk okay, the more he understood that he was not looking at a contractor improvising. He was looking at a technique, a complete, coherent, deathworld-bred method for standing inside a shared space with a thing that could unmake you, and surviving it not by force but by the total refusal of fear. And Grisho de Toll, who had processed Class 9 predators on 11 worlds and lost good handlers to every one of them, recognized that he was in the presence of a discipline older and better than his own. So the annex grew. It grew a section on posture, handler maintains loose stance, weight low, no squared shoulders read as challenge. It grew a section on the voice, handler maintains a low register at all volumes. The specimen responds not to loudness but to the absence of tremor. It grew a section on the flat hand, which Toll named, in the annex, the open palm, and defined as asterisk the deliberate presentation of a defenseless surface, communicating to the specimen the handler's total absence of fear, not to be attempted by any handler who is, in fact, afraid, as the specimen reads the falsehood instantly. It grew a section on the asterisk weight and the okay asterisk, which Toll, reaching for the coalition's own martial grammar because it was the only grammar he had, titled asterisk posture of restraint and release asterisk, and codified as the twin pillars of what he was, by the 40th page, openly calling the Alcott method. He brought the annex to Wren for review, because he was an honest animal, and she read the first 3 pages standing in the yard with Biscuit's head on her boot, and then looked up at the enormous anxious Balamic with an expression Oru would treasure for the rest of his life. "Grish," she said, "this is 40 pages. 41. You wrote 41 pages about me telling my dog to sit." "I have named it the posture of restraint," Toll said, with great dignity. Wren looked at him. She looked at the annex. She looked at the Morvhan, who chose that moment to yawn hugely, displaying the architecture of the jaw that had ended 31 coalition lives, and then to sigh and settle deeper onto her boot. "You know what," she said, "sure, posture of restraint." "Why not?" She handed the annex back. "Fix the part on page 9, though. He doesn't respond to the whistle. He responds to me being calm enough to whistle. That's the whole thing. If you're scared and you whistle, he just knows you're a scared person making a noise. Write that part down. That's the only part that matters." Toll wrote that part down. It became, in the final directorate document that would eventually circulate to every beast control station in the coalition, the first principle of the Alcott method, rendered in the coalition's driest institutional font. The technique cannot be performed by the fearful. The calm is not a tool the handler uses. The calm is the handler. There is no other instruction. And 41 pages of coalition doctrine, born on Cold Hero Flats, would go on to save more handlers' lives than every weapon the Directorate had ever issued. All of it descended from a girl on a death world telling a dog to sit. The prefect's request for orbital sanitation died on Registrar Ilanth Corsed's desk, and it died with a single line of coalition regulation, which was the only kind of weapon a registrar carried, and the only kind she ever needed. "An orbital strike," she told Davin Ashitro in the command hab, with Oru standing witness against the wall because a registrar's rulings required one, "would kill the specimen, which is the object of an open incident under my jurisdiction. You may not resolve my incident by destroying its subject any more than you may resolve a trial by burning the courthouse. The strike is denied. It will remain denied until the incident is closed, and I will not close the incident, Prefect, because the incident is the most interesting thing to happen to the Coalition's understanding of apex biology in 400 years, and I did not become a registrar to file it in an afternoon so that you could make a contract window. The Prefect's small features worked. Registrars close incidents on findings, make a finding. I have made several. Would you like to hear them? Yawned did not wait. 1. The specimen is not, as classified, uncontainable. It is uncontained, which is a different word, and the difference is a girl. 2. The Coalition's entire threat classification framework is built on the assumption that an apex predator cannot be in relationship with a sapient of another species, and that assumption is now standing in the yard eating ration protein off a rock. 3. And here something moved under the V-hollow stillness that Oru had not seen before. 3. Prefect, I find that the auxiliary Ren Alcott has done, in 11 days, with a flat hand and a calm voice, what the massed resources of the Beast Control Directorate could not do in 4 seasons, and that this is not an accident, and that it is not luck, and that if the Coalition were wise, it would be building a school around her instead of trying to find a lever long enough to move her out of the way of a bonus. She folded her gray hands. I am not going to help you move her, Prefect. I am going to protect the incident, and the incident at present includes her. Davin Ashitro left the command hab without another word, which Oru had learned by now to read as the most dangerous thing the Prefect did. Because the Prefect had understood something in the registrar's ruling that Yawned, in the moment of her own eloquence, had handed him. The strike was denied, while the specimen was the subject of an incident. The incident existed because of the relationship. The relationship existed because of the girl. Remove the girl and there was no relationship. No relationship, no incident. No incident, and the specimen reverted, cleanly and administratively, to what the manual said it was. A sovereign-class threat, 31 dead, above the scale, do not. And a plain, unblockable candidate for orbital sanitation, with no registrar's jurisdiction standing in the way. The Prefect did not need to touch the animal. He only needed to touch the girl. He came for her contract first, because he was an administrator and the paper was where he lived. Ren Alcott's engagement with the Cold Hero Relay Project was a standard environmental auxiliary contract, terminable by the sector office for cause, and Davin Ashitro was the sector office. He terminated it on the 12th day of his presence and the 22nd of hers, citing conduct incompatible with site safety, to wit, the deliberate habituation of a sovereign-class predator to the station perimeter, and he attached to the termination an order of removal placing Ren on the next outbound skiff, which was due in 40 hours, and a travel advisory noting that environmental auxiliaries were not permitted to transport livestock or companion animals aboard Coalition transport. He delivered it to her himself, in the yard, in front of as many personnel as he could arrange to be present, because the Prefect understood that a public thing is harder to undo than a private one. Ren read the termination standing on her flat feeding rock, with Biscuit's shoulder against her hip. She read it twice. Then she looked up, and Oru, recording from the platform, as he always was now, caught the exact moment the mild face went to something underneath the mild. So the animal can't come with me, she said. Coalition transport does not carry livestock. And the second I'm gone, he's not mine anymore, so he's back to being a threat so you can drop your strike. She nodded slowly. You worked that out fast, I'll give you that. That's genuinely clever. You don't have to be the one who kills him. You just make sure I'm not here to make him a person, and then the manual kills him for you, and it's nobody's fault. It's just arithmetic. She folded the termination in half. You keep using that word, arithmetic, like it's the honest one. It is the honest one, auxiliary. 31. 31 dead, yeah. She stepped down off the rock. She was a head and a half shorter than the prefect, and she walked right up to the edge of his space and stopped, and the whole yard held its breath, and Biscuit rose off the ground behind her without a sound and stood, and did not come closer, and watched. "Let me do some arithmetic for you, prefect. You've got a corridor you've never once managed to keep open. You've got a wild population out in the deep flats that you've catalogued at, what did the directorate say, 30, 40 animals in the migratory band. And you've got a drying north pan and a buoy array that I read every morning, which is my actual job, the one you just fired me from." She tapped the folded paper against his chest once. "You want to talk arithmetic? Ask me what the buoys are saying." The prefect did not ask, but Illeth Course said at the edge of the yard went very still. "Ask her," the registrar said quietly, "what the buoys are saying." What the buoys were saying, Wren explained an hour later in the command hab, to Illeth and Toll and a stone-faced Commander Vale and a prefect who had come only because not coming would have looked worse, was that the season was turning, and that Coldharrow Station had been built, by people who did not read weather, directly across a migratory funnel. "The North Pan's drying," she said. She had the buoy array's data spread across the hab table, and she'd been reading it every morning for 22 days, and it was, Oru realized, the first time anyone had asked the environmental auxiliary about the environment. "It dries every year around now," the models say. "And when it dries, the deep flat grazers move the big herd animals, the ones your survey called Dunoxin. They come down off the high pan looking for the last green, and they come down through here because this is the low ground, this is where the water holds longest. Thousands of them. It's a migration." "We have logged the grazer migration," Vale said. "It is not a threat. The walls hold against grazers." "The walls aren't the problem," Wren looked up. "What follows the grazers is the problem." She put her finger on a scatter of seismic returns at the edge of the array, faint, distant, moving. "Your Morvhon band, 30, 40 animals. They don't range the deep flats for fun, Commander. They range it because that's where the food is, and the food is about to walk right down this funnel, and they're going to follow it, the way they follow it every single season. Except every other season there was nothing here but flat grass, and this season there's a station full of soft, warm coalition personnel, sitting directly in the road." She straightened. "That's what the buoys are saying, the herd's coming, and the pack's coming behind the herd. And they'll be here inside a week." The silence in the command hab had a different quality than the silences that had come before it. "One animal," Illeth said slowly, "held this corridor for 4 seasons and killed 31. You are telling me that 40 of them are about to walk through the front of it." 38 by the seismic, Wren said. "But yes, roughly, that's the size of it." "The walls," Vale began. "The walls are rated for grazers and small predators," Toll said quietly, and every eye turned to the Balamek, who had spent 3 seasons learning exactly what the walls of Coldharrow could and could not stop. "I have run the density figures on the specimen. One of them goes through that wall like it is a courtesy. 40 of them." He did not finish. He did not have to. The prefect had not spoken. The prefect was looking at the seismic scatter, and Oru watched the arithmetic run behind his sharp small eyes and watched it arrive, for once, somewhere the prefect did not want to be. "Then we evacuate," Davin Ashatro said. "We call in transport, we pull the personnel, we abandon the station ahead of the migration, and we return after it passes. The corridor is delayed a further season, but the personnel survive." He said it crisply, a man recovering his footing on the solid ground of a decision. "I will file the request tonight. Nearest transport with the lift to pull 200 personnel is 9 days out," Vale said. "The migration is inside 7. The solid ground went out from under the prefect again. "Then some of us leave and some of us hold," he said. "Priority personnel on the skiffs, the rest behind the walls, we." "The walls do not hold, Prefect," Toll said. "I have just told you the walls do not hold." And into the specific, rising, coalition panic that Oru had watched empty the station on the 11th day, and had thought he understood. The human girl said the thing that would be quoted afterward on 9 worlds, in the record Oru kept and could never quite believe he had been present for. "There's one thing on this whole flat," Ren Alcott said, "that 38 wild Morvhan will not walk over." She looked at the prefect. She was not smiling. "You spent your whole week trying to get rid of him. You want to try the next week keeping him." It should have ended the argument. It did not, because Davin Ashitro had staked too much of himself on the animal being a threat to accept, in a single afternoon, that the animal was the only wall that would hold. He did the thing that men like the prefect do when a fact will not fit the shape of their career. He decided the fact was a manipulation. The auxiliary had invented the migration, or exaggerated it, to make herself indispensable and save her animal. The buoy data was environmental noise. The seismic returns were the deep flat's usual grumble. And even if the migration was real, the coalition did not survive by making a 23-year-old contractor and her pet the load-bearing wall of a strategic station. The coalition survived by protocol, by chain of command, by the removal of unauthorized variables. He had terminated her contract. The termination stood. She would be on the skiff in, he checked, 31 hours, and the station would meet the migration the coalition way, behind coalition walls, under coalition command. And if the walls did not hold then, that was a failure that could be laid at the feet of a station commander and a registrar and an insubordinate auxiliary, and not at his. Oru knew all this because the prefect said a version of it, that night, to his enforcement officer, and Oru heard it because Oru had by now made a quiet habit of being near doorways, and because Ilanth had told him to keep the record well. The enforcement officer's name was Sethai's Onokar. He was Korvani, like the prefect, but where Davin Ashitro was sharp and quick and administrative, Sethai's was simply hard, a coalition marshal, the kind the sector office sent to make a removal happen when a removal was refused. His orders were plain. At first light, ahead of the migration argument gaining any more ground, he was to take the auxiliary Alcott to the skiff pad and put her aboard the outbound skiff, by escort if she came willingly, and by restraint if she did not. And the animal was not his problem. The animal was the directorate's problem, and the directorate would deal with the animal once the girl who made it a person was 40,000 kilometers away. "And if the specimen objects," Sethai said, "to my restraining the girl." The prefect was quiet for a moment. "The directorate assessment," he said, "is that the specimen's docility is a function of the girl's own calm. If she is calm, it is calm." "So you will simply make certain," he said, "that she stays calm." Oru, in the dark beside the doorway, understood the order underneath the order, and his mandibles went cold. "Make certain she stays calm," which meant, do not let her cry out. Do not let her struggle in a way the animal can read. Take her quietly, take her fast, keep her voice level and her body still by whatever means, because the one thing the entire plan could not survive was the animal understanding, in its wordless certain way, that the small pink creature it had chosen was afraid. And why? They were going to try to move Ren Alcott without letting the deadliest animal in the galaxy find out. She didn't want to go. Oru Kasum did not sleep that night. He sat in his cramped berth with the record open in front of him, and he wrote down the order, word for word, and then he sat looking at it for a long time, a cartographic auxiliary second class who had never in his life done a single thing that was not in a manual. And he thought about the girl on the feeding rock stepping in front of 6 meters of slate to protect it from the people who were supposed to be the civilized ones. Then he got up in the dark and went to find the registrar. Marshal Sethai's Onokar came for Ren Alcott at first light, and he came correctly, which was the worst thing about it. He did not bring a squad. A squad would have read as a threat, and a threat would have woken the animal all the way. He brought 2 of his own people, quiet ones, and he timed it for the gray hour before the whistle, when the station was still, and Wren was alone in the equipment shed logging the night's buoy data, and Biscuit was lying in the yard 40 meters off with Custard the Warhound beside him, both of them drowsing in the way of large predators, which is to say 90% asleep and 10% aware of everything. Oru watched from the platform. He had not slept and he had not gone to the registrar's berth after all. She had not been in it. Ilanth kept her own hours, and so he had done the only other thing available to a clerk, which was to be present and to record, and he stood at the platform rail with the drone up and his throat sack tight, and he watched the marshal cross the yard toward the shed, and he did not know how to stop it, and so he did the thing that would matter later, more than he could have guessed. He did not stop recording. Sethais reached the shed. He put his head in. Oru's drone caught the audio. Auxiliary Alcott, sector removal order. You're on the outbound skiff. Come with me quietly and this is easy. A pause. Then Wren's voice level unhurried, the same voice she used on the animal. The registrar blocked the strike. My contract termination's under appeal. You don't have a clean order and you know it, or you'd have brought more than 2 friends and you'd have done it at noon. I have an order, Sethais said. Come quietly. No, Wren said. I don't think I will. And Marshal Sethais Onokar, who was hard, and who was under a hard man's order, reached in and took the human girl by the arm. What happened next happened in a span of time that Oru's recording could divide into moments only afterward, played back slow, again and again, in the sector inquiry that would follow. In the moment itself it was one thing, indivisible, the way a lightning strike is one thing. The marshal's grip closed on Wren's arm and pulled, and Wren, who did not panic, who had never once panicked, whose entire deathworld-bred being was built around the refusal of the flinch, did not cry out and did not struggle, but her heart rate spiked. Her scent changed. Her body, for a quarter of a second before her discipline caught it, did the thing that a body does when a larger creature seizes it, and the change went out from her across 40 meters of gray morning air. And the Morphon woke all the way up. It did not roar. Oru would tell the inquiry this over and over because the inquiry could not seem to believe it. The animal made no sound at all. It simply was not lying in the yard, and then it was standing at the door of the equipment shed, having crossed 40 meters in a time that the recording rendered as a single gray smear, and it was between the marshal and the girl, not touching either of them, its vast slate bulk simply inserted into the space where the marshal's arm connected to the marshal's intent, and its head was down, and its forward eyes were on Sethais Onokar from a hand's width away, and the low sound had started. The one that traveled through the ground, except it was not the purr. It was the other one. Oru had never heard the other one. He understood, hearing it, that almost nobody ever had, because almost nobody who heard it lived in a shape that could describe it afterward. Sethais Onokar let go of the girl's arm. His 2 people had already gone down to the dust, flat, the old prey posture, hands empty and open. The marshal himself stood frozen with the animal's jaw a hand's width from his face, and to his enormous credit he did not run, because running was the one thing his hard coalition training and the animal's older grammar agreed would end him, and he stood there in the gray light having understood, completely and permanently, the exact distance between his life and its end, which was the length of a decision that had already been made and was, for reasons he did not understand, not yet being carried out. The reason it was not being carried out was that Wren had put her hand on the animal's jaw. "Leave it," she said. Just that, not loud. The 2 words she'd said the first day to keep it from the warhound. Her hand flat on the slate, her arm, the one the marshal had seized, steady, her voice with no tremor in it at all, because she had caught her own body's betrayal and mastered it and put the calm back on, and the calm went down her arm and into the animal like a hand on a straining line. "Leave it," she said again. "He's done, look at him. He's done, he's not going to touch me again, are you?" This last to the marshal, still level, still unhurried, a woman confirming a return policy. "Are you?" HFYStories said, in a voice that had gone entirely to gravel. No. There, Wren said to the animal, see, settle. Leave it. And she scratched the great jaw once, and stepped around the slate bulk of it and out of the shed into the open, unhurried, and the Morvhan backed off the marshal one slow step, and another, never taking its forward eyes off him, and the low ground sound wound down and stopped, and the deadliest animal in the galaxy turned and put itself at the girl's heel and left HFYStories standing in the doorway of the equipment shed alive, by 2 words and knowing it. The marshal did not put Wren Alcott on any skiff. The marshal filed, that same morning, a formal refusal of the prefect's order, on the grounds that its execution constituted a foreseeable lethal hazard to coalition personnel, meaning himself, and requested reassignment. Oru got a copy for the record. It was the shortest document in the whole file, and he always thought the most honest thing any of the prefect's people ever wrote. Registrar Ilanth Kor said, reinstated Wren Alcott's contract before the morning meal, on the authority that she had held all along, and had simply been waiting for the prefect to make necessary. You bound the auxiliary to an open incident the moment you tried to remove her from it, she told Davin Ashatro in the command hab, with the marshal's refusal and Oru's recording both logged and time-stamped and impossible to unsee. Personnel material to an incident may not be reassigned by the sector office while the incident is open. That is not my invention, Prefect. That is the oldest regulation the Oversight Branch has, and it exists precisely so that a schedule cannot dispose of a witness. She stays, her animal stays, and your removal order is now itself part of the incident, which means that when I eventually write my findings, it will be in them. She let that sit. I would think hard over the next 7 days about how you would like to appear in them. The prefect appeared over the next 7 days to have very few options, and he was administrator enough to know it. The migration was inside a week. The transport that could evacuate the station was outside a week. The walls that were supposed to hold would not hold. And the only wall that would, the only thing on the whole flat that 38 wild Morvhan would not walk over, belonged, in every way that mattered, to a 23-year-old environmental auxiliary he had spent his entire tenure trying to remove. The arithmetic he had trusted his whole career had inverted itself completely. The variable he'd wanted to subtract was the only term left on the side of the equation that meant survival. He did not apologize. Oru noted for the record that Davin Ashatro never once apologized, to the girl or the animal or anyone else, across the whole of what followed. But on the second morning after the removal, the prefect came out into the yard where Wren was throwing the habstrut for biscuit, and he stood at a careful distance and watched the gray line pour out across the flat and pour back, and he said, stiffly, to the air more than to her, "The station has 211 personnel." "I know," Wren said. She caught the strut through it again. "If your assessment of the migration is correct, and the walls do not hold, the animal is the only barrier between the migratory band and those 211. I know that too." The prefect's throat membrane worked. "Then I am asking you," he said, and the words came out of him like they cost him teeth, "what you require." Wren caught the strut, she held it. She looked at the prefect for a long moment, and Oru, recording, thought she might make him say more, might make him crawl the way the warhound had crawled, because she had earned it and he had earned it. But she didn't. She was, Oru had come to understand, not a person who took the extra step onto a beaten thing. Her mother had not raised a flincher, but her mother also, evidently, had not raised a gloater. 3 things, Wren said. 1. Nobody fires a weapon of any kind without my say, because a wild Morvhan that's just being warned off is a very different animal from a wild Morvhan that's been shot at, and the difference is all of your lives. 2. You get me the buoy array patched into the command hab so I can read the migration in real time, because I need to know where the herd's going to break before it breaks. And 3, she threw the strut, Watch the gray line go, you stop calling him the specimen. His name's Biscuit. If he's going to stand between your people and 40 of his own kind, the least you can do is use his name while he does it." The prefect was quiet. "That is not a tactical requirement," he said. "No," Wren agreed. "It's the only one that isn't. Take it or leave it." Davin Ashatro looked at the animal. 31 dead. Above the scale. Do not. And now the wall his station's survival hung from, with a name a human girl had given it because it had let her get away with everything. "Biscuit," the prefect said. "It came out of him like a stone." "There you go," said Wren. "See, not so hard." They had 4 days. Wren spent them the way a deathworld child spends the days before weather, reading the sky, walking the ground, and preparing the one animal she had to prepare. She walked the flats with Biscuit for hours, out along the line where the migratory funnel narrowed toward the station, and Oru, who had appointed himself, without anyone quite authorizing it, the recorder of the whole affair, went with them at a distance that shrank a little each day, until by the 3rd day he was walking perhaps 30 meters off, close enough to hear the girl talk to the animal, which she did constantly. In the low, unbroken murmur that Toll's doctrine had by now formally designated the contact register, and which Wren just called keeping him company. "They'll come down the funnel with the herd," she told the Morvhan, on the 3rd day, as if it could understand and Oru had stopped being sure it couldn't. "The herd first, then them behind it. And you're going to want to go for the herd because that's food and that's what your whole body is for. But you're not going to. You're going to stand right here in the neck of the funnel, where the herd splits around the high rocks, and you're going to hold this line, and you're going to let the herd go past on both sides and around the station, and when the band comes down behind them you're going to make them go around too." She stopped. She crouched and the great head came down to her level, and she took the jaw in both hands. "You've never had to share the flats before. I know. You've been the only one out here so long you forgot there was any other way to be, but you're not the only one anymore. You've got me and you've got that idiot warhound, and you've got 200 soft coalition people who are going to be so scared they can't see straight, and I need you to be the calm one for them the way I'm the calm one for you. Can you do that? Can you be somebody's still center?" She pressed her forehead to the slate briefly, the way Oru had seen her do only once before at the outcrop when she thought no one could see. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah, you can. Look at you. You've been waiting your whole life for somebody to need you to hold still." The Morvhan rumbled, low, the purr, the good sound, and leaned its whole terrible weight gently into the small pink creature's hands, and Oruvas Kasim turned off his drone for a moment, because some things did not belong in the record, even a record kept well. Then he turned it back on, because the migration was 3 days out, and 38 wild Morvhan were coming down the funnel behind a river of grazers, and the only wall that would hold was a lonely animal learning, at the far end of its life, how to be somebody's, and the coalition was going to need to see how that turned out. On the 4th day, with the dust still low on the northern horizon and the whole station winding tighter by the hour, the coalition sent a veterinarian, because if the animal was going to be the wall, then the coalition wanted to know the wall was sound. Her name was Sethuli Vanro, and she was a xenomedic of the Survey Corps, and she came out onto the flat with a case of instruments and the specific brisk confidence of a professional who has decided in advance not to be impressed, and she got about as far as the edge of the yard before the confidence met the animal and negotiated a quieter arrangement with itself. She stopped. She looked at the 6 meters of slate lying in the shade of Hab 3. She looked at her case of instruments, most of which were sized for a coalition riding beast. "I am to assess its health," she said to Wren, in a voice that had recovered most of its briskness. "Cardiac, respiratory, the joints, the core wants a baseline before he holds the line. I will need to get close. I will need to touch him." She squared her shoulders. "I am told there is a method." "There's a method," Wren agreed. "Step 1, unsquare your shoulders. You're telling him you want to fight. Sethuli unsquared them. Step 2, put the big loud case down. It hums and he doesn't like things that hum. Step 3, Wren crouched by the old gray head and murmured to it. Lo, the contact register and the forward eyes opened and found the medic and stayed calm because the girl was calm. Step 3, you come over here slow, and you let him smell your hand before you touch anything. And you do not, whatever you do, hold your breath. He can hear you hold your breath. It's the loudest thing a scared person does. Sethuli Vanro did the bravest work of her career in the next hour, and she did it, as the girl had promised, entirely by not running while she was frightened. She smelled in her hand. She laid it, trembling only a little, on the great slate chest, and felt under her palm the slow, enormous drum of a heart the size of her own torso, unhurried, 40 beats to her 100. She listened to the breath move through the architecture of the jaw that had ended 31 lives. She palpated the old shoulders and found, in the left one, the deep-set stiffness of an animal that had run the flats alone a long time, and she looked up, and Wren was watching her. His left shoulder catches, Wren said. In the cold, I've felt it. He hides it, but he favors it turning left, so I turn him right when I can. Arthritic, Sethuli said. The joint, it will worsen. There are things I can do for the pain. If he will let me. She said it carefully, and Oru, watching from the platform, understood that something had shifted in the medic, that she had come out to assess an asset and had found, under her trembling palm, a patient and an old one, and one in a kind of pain she knew how to ease. Ask him, Wren said. Not me, him. Show him the thing you want to put in the shoulder, let him smell it, and then do it slow, and if he doesn't move, he said yes. She scratched the great jaw. He's better about the vet than my mother's dogs ever were, honestly. They'd take the fence down. He just sighs like it's beneath him. Sethuli showed the animal the injector. She let him smell it. She set it slow, against the stiff old shoulder, and the Morvhan threat-class sovereign above the scale, do not, turned its vast head, and looked at the small coalition medic with her trembling hands, and let out a long put-upon breath through its jaw, and did not move, and Sethuli Vanro eased 4 seasons of cold weather ache out of the deadliest shoulder in the galaxy, while its owner lay in the shade and sighed like the whole business was beneath him. She came back every day after that, migration or no migration. She said it was to monitor the joint. Oru noted, for the record, that she also brought, on the second visit, a warmed compress she had made herself, off the manifest, out of her own off-hours, and that she left it under the old shoulder in the cold of the dawn watch before the band came, so that the wall the coalition's survival hung on would hold the line without pain. Nobody had ordered her to. It was not in any protocol. It went into Oru's record beside the cooks who saved the best protein and the sentinel who whistled the 2 notes under his breath at the perimeter. In the growing quiet file Oru had started keeping without quite meaning to. The file of all the small, unordered kindnesses that the coalition's people had begun, one at a time, to offer an animal they had spent 10,000 years learning to fear. As though, once a single human girl had shown them it was allowed. Some long-held breath in the whole institution had finally gone out, and underneath the fear there had been, all along, only this, the ordinary wish of ordinary people to be gentle with an old thing in pain. You're all going soft on him, Wren observed, the evening before the band, watching Sethuli tuck the warm compress under the gray shoulder. She did not sound displeased. 3 seasons ago you'd have dropped a rock on him from orbit. Now the medic's making him a hot water bottle. The medic, said Sethuli Vanro, with dignity, not looking up from the shoulder, is treating a documented arthritic condition in a coalition asset. Sure she is, said Wren, and scratched the old jaw and let her have it. The leading edge of the herd reached Cold Hero on the 5th morning, a full day ahead of Wren's models, and it reached them as a change in the light. Oru saw it before he understood it, a brownish haze along the whole northern horizon, low, unbroken, the color of the high pan lifted into the air. Then the ground began to speak. Not loudly at first. A tremor you felt in the teeth before you heard it in the ears, the sound of a great many heavy bodies moving together over dry ground, and by mid-morning the haze had resolved into what it was, which was Dunoxin, thousands of them. A slow brown river of them pouring down out of the high country toward the last green of the drying flats, and the leading animals had already reached the far sensor pylons, and were flowing past the station on both sides exactly as Wren had said they would. The station held its breath. But the grazers were only grazers. They parted around the walls like water around a stone, incurious, enormous, harmless. And after the first hour of terror, the personnel of Cold Hero began, cautiously, to breathe again, and a few of them even came up onto the walls to watch the brown river go by, because it was, in its slow way, one of the great sights of the frontier, and most of them had never seen a living world do anything at this scale. Wren did not watch the herd. Wren watched the dust behind it. "They're in it," she said. She was up on the command hab roof with the buoy feed and a pair of coalition long lenses, and Oru had climbed up after her because he had stopped pretending he was anywhere but at her shoulder now. "See the herd move, not the front, the middle. See how the middle keeps bunching, pulsing." She handed him the lenses. He looked, and after a moment he saw it. The great brown river was not flowing evenly. Deep in its body, kilometers back, there were places where the oxen surged and compressed and flinched forward in waves, as if something were moving through them, and around those places the herd left small, ragged gaps that closed and opened and closed. "The band," Oru said. "The band, hunting as they come, picking off the edges of the herd, keeping it moving, riding it down the funnel like drovers." She took the lenses back. 38 of them, give or take, spread through 6 or 8 kilometers of herd. And the herd's going to hit the neck of the funnel by this evening and split around the high rocks and pour around the station on both sides all night. And somewhere in the back of that, sometime before dawn, the band comes through the neck. She lowered the lenses. Her plain face was very still. "That's when it happens. The neck. That's where I'll have him." They had one more thing to survive before the band, and it came at midday, and it came alone. A single Morvhan broke off the front of the band. A scout, or an outrider, or simply a young one running ahead of its elders. And it came down through the tail of the leading herd at a speed that turned the brown river white with panic, and it came toward the station, and every alarm on Cold Hero went off at once. Oru was on the roof. He saw the whole of it, and he recorded the whole of it, and it was the closest he came, in all the days of Cold Hero, to watching the thing the pet safety of the record would never let him show. The wild Morvhan was smaller than Biscuit, younger, leaner, its slate hide not yet gone to the deep weathered gray of the old animal, and it came in fast and low and certain, and the coalition personnel on the walls broke and ran for the second time. And Commander Vale's sentinels came up with their rifles despite everything, and Wren's voice came across the yard flat and hard and carrying. "Weapons down. Nobody fires. Nobody fires or you kill us all." They did not fire. It was, Oru thought later, the single most disciplined thing the garrison of Cold Hero ever did, and they did it because a 23-year-old contractor told them to. And because by the 5th day they had all, without admitting it, started to believe her more than they believed the manual. Wren walked out into the yard. Biscuit was already up, already between her and the incoming animal, and the old Morvhan did a thing Oru had not seen it do. It lowered its head and spread its forelimbs and made itself wide, and the low ground sound came up out of it, the other one, the warning, and it aimed all of that not at Wren but out, at the young wild thing tearing toward the walls. And Wren walked up and put her hand flat on Biscuit's shoulder, and Oru heard her through the drone murmuring the contact register low and unbroken. "Easy, easy, that's yours to say, not mine. You tell him whose flat this is. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Tell him." The young Morvhan hit the edge of the yard at full speed and stopped. It stopped the way the warhound had stopped, all 4 limbs locking, dust plowing up in front of it, and it stopped because the thing standing in the yard was not prey and was not empty territory. It was an old, vast, weathered apex, bigger than the young one, deeper in the chest, its hide gone to the gray of a thing that has survived everything the flats could send, and it was standing over a small, soft creature it had claimed, and it was calm. That was the part the young wild animal could not process. Oru understood, watching its head tilt and its weight rock back. Not the size, the calm. Here was an apex holding a territory, with soft prey all around it, and it was not hunting, and it was not afraid, and it was not challenging. It was simply, immovably, asterisk at home, in the way that only the true owner of a place can be, and every instinct the young Morvhan had told it that a place held that calmly by something that large had been held a very long time, and would cost more to take than it could possibly be worth. The young Morvhan lowered its head. It backed away, one slow step, another. And then it turned and flowed back into the herd and was gone, and it took its report back to the band with it, whatever an animal's report is. And Ren Alcott let out a long, slow breath and leaned her forehead against Biscuit's shoulder for a moment, and the yard behind her stayed empty of weapons fire, and 211 coalition personnel understood, all at once, exactly what they were going to be standing behind that night. That was one, Ren said to no one, straightening. Young one, scared, easy to turn. She looked north at the dust. The band's going to be harder. The band's got an old one leading it, and the old one's going to want to know why there's a claim on the best killing ground on the whole flat, and it's going to come and ask. She wiped her face. So we'd better be ready to answer. The prefect evacuated the non-essential personnel that afternoon on the 2 station skiffs in shifts, because 2 skiffs could not lift 211, but they could lift the ones who did not need to be there. And Davin Ashatro, whatever else he was not going to keep frightened clerks on a wall that might not hold. He did not put himself on a skiff. Oru noted it for the record and underlined this one too because it surprised him. The prefect could have gone. His authority did not require his body. He could have run the coalition's response from orbit and been well within his rights and well outside the reach of 38 wild Morvhan. Instead, he sent the skiffs out full of others, and he stayed on the wall in his crisp sector office coat, looking north at the dust. And when Ilanth Korsed asked him why, Oru was near the doorway. Oru was always near the doorway now. The prefect was quiet for a while before he answered. Because it will be in your findings, Registrar, he said, either way, that I was the man who tried to remove the girl and then ran, or that I was the man who tried to remove the girl and stayed to stand behind her animal when the accounting came due. He looked at the dust. I cannot change the first half. I find I would like some say over the second. Ilanth considered him. That, she said, is the most honest thing you have said since you arrived. Yes, said Davin Ashatro. I imagine it is. I don't recommend the sensation. And he stayed on the wall. By nightfall, the herd was pouring around the station on both sides. A brown flood in the dark, 10,000 heavy bodies, a kilometer wide, splitting on the high rocks north of the walls and rejoining south of them. And the sound of it was the sound of the world itself moving. And inside that sound, the 200 coalition personnel who remained sat behind walls they had been told would not hold, and waited for the thing that came behind the herd. And out in the neck of the funnel, north of the walls, where the high rocks split the flood, a girl from a deathworld sat on a cold rock in the dark with her hand on the shoulder of the deadliest animal in the surveyed galaxy, and talked to it, low and unbroken, and did not sleep, and did not flinch, and waited for the dawn and the band with it. Oru stayed on the wall with the drone up and the record running. He had asked Ilanth once that evening whether he should be out there with the girl, whether the record needed him closer. And the registrar had looked at him with her unreadable gray eyes and said, No, clerk. The record needs you alive to keep it. And the girl does not need company. The girl has never once, in all the days I have watched her, needed company. A pause. She only ever needed the animal to. And now it has her. So we will sit on this wall, you and I, and we will watch what happens when a thing that has been alone its whole life finally has a reason to hold a line. She had folded her gray hands. Keep it well, Oruvas Castle. Whatever comes down that funnel at dawn, keep it well. I have a feeling the coalition is going to argue about this night for 400 years, and I would like the argument to at least be arguing about the truth. So Oru kept the drone up and the record running, and he did not sleep either, and the herd poured past in the dark, and the dust behind it came on, and somewhere out in the black neck of the funnel, the girl talked to the animal, low and unbroken, all night long. The band came through the neck of the funnel in the gray hour before dawn, and they came the way weather comes, without announcement, so that one moment the neck was empty of everything but the tail of the herd, and the next it was full of Morvhan. Oru counted them on the drone feed later, frame by frame, because in the moment counting was impossible. 36. 36 wild Morvhan coming down through the high rocks in a loose spread formation that was not quite a hunting line and not quite a herd. The way a thing moves when it has been the apex of a whole world for so long that it has no formation because it has never needed one. They came at a walk. That was the terrible part, Oru would tell the inquiry. Not a charge. A walk, the unhurried, wait-forward walk of 36 creatures that had never in the history of their line met anything that made them hurry, pouring down out of the rocks into the first gray light with the drying flats and the last of the herd, and beyond it, the walls of Cold Hero Station and its 200 remaining lives. And in the neck of the funnel, alone on the open ground where the rocks split the flood, one old gray Morvhan stood across their road, with a small pink creature at its shoulder. The band saw them. You could see the band see them. A ripple went through the loose spread, heads coming around, the walk slowing. 36 apex predators, arriving at the best killing ground on the whole flat. On the season they had ridden the herd down to it since before the coalition had a word for them, found the road held. Held by one of their own kind, old and vast, standing calm across the neck with the dawn behind it. And held, more strangely, by something none of them had a category for at all, the small, soft, two-legged thing at the old one's shoulder, that did not run, that did not even watch them with the wide-eyed attention of prey, that stood with one hand on the old one's flank and its weight easy and its head up, as if the arrival of 36 deaths were a matter it had already thought about and filed. The band stopped. Not all at once and not for long. But they stopped, the whole loose spread of them coming to a ragged halt across 200 meters of open ground, and for a moment in the gray dawn nothing moved but the dust and the last of the herd streaming away south. And Oru, on the wall a kilometer off with the drone pushed as close as he dared, found that he had stopped breathing, and that beside him Ilanth Corsair had stopped too. And that all along the wall of Cold Hero, the coalition personnel who had crept up to watch the thing they had been told would kill them, were utterly, perfectly silent, 200 held breaths, because every one of them understood that they were watching the exact moment on which their lives balanced. Then one Morvhan came forward out of the band. It was old. Oru saw that even from a kilometer, old the way Biscuit was old, the deep-weathered gray, the heavy chest, the unhurried certainty of an animal that had led a band down this funnel more seasons than the coalition had held the sector. The Alpha. It came forward out of the spread at a slow walk, alone, its head level, and it stopped perhaps 40 meters from Biscuit. The manual's distance, Oru thought wildly, the exact distance the coalition had learned to keep from a single Morvhan, and here were two of them keeping it from each other, and it stood, and it looked at the old gray animal holding the neck of the funnel, and it made the question. Oru had no word for the sound. It was not the purr and it was not the warning. It was lower than either, a long, slow pressure in the ground that came up through the wall and into 200 coalition chests, and it was, unmistakably, a question, the oldest question there is, the one every apex asks another when they meet on ground worth holding. Whose? Whose is this ground? And Ren Alcott, one hand flat on Biscuit's flank, tipped her head back and looked up at the old animal she had named on the 11th day, and Oru's drone caught her voice, low and even and carrying strangely far in the still dawn air. "Go on," she said. "Tell him you know the answer. You've known it since I put my hand on your face." She scratched the gray flank slow. "Who's ground? Go on, Biscuit, tell him whose." And Biscuit told him. The old Morvhan did not make a sound in answer at first. It did something Oru's recording could barely hold, something that read on the feed as almost nothing and landed on the whole flat as everything. It lifted its head, and it widened its stance, and it let its own weight settle forward onto its forelimbs, and the low pressure that came up out of it was not the question anymore. It was the claim. Mine. This ground is mine. It has been mine since before the sky changed. Stand aside, old one, or be moved. The band behind their alpha began to spread. That was the moment it could have gone the other way. Oru saw the spread begin, the loose formation opening, the flanks drifting wide, 35 wild Morvhan instinctively fanning to bring their alpha's challenge around the old gray animal that stood in its road, and past it, toward the soft, warm walls beyond. If the flanks came around, the walls would not hold. Nothing would hold. The neck of the funnel would open, and the band would pour through it and around the station, and the accounting the prefect had spoken of would come due on 211 lives in the time it takes to say so. Oru's forelimbs locked on the wall rail. Beside him he heard Ilanth say, very quietly, a word in Old Vihalu that was not a coalition word at all. That was the word her own grandmother had probably made to keep her from the flats. And Ren Alcott stepped forward. She stepped out from Biscuit's shoulder, out onto the open ground between the two old apex animals, alone, a small pink creature in a dust-colored coat, and she walked 3 steps toward the wild alpha and its spreading band, and she stopped, and she spread her own arms wide, not in threat, Oru understood, but in the exact mirror of the thing Toll's doctrine called the open palm, the deliberate presentation of a defenseless surface. The total absence of fear made visible to an animal in the only grammar an animal reads. And she stood there in the gray dawn, between 36 Morvhan and everything they had come down the funnel to take, with her arms open and her weight easy and no tremor anywhere in her at all. The spread stopped. Oru would never be able to fully explain, to the inquiry or to himself, what happened in the flats in the next 10 seconds, because it happened below the level where explanation lives. But he had watched enough of the girl by now to understand the shape of it. 36 wild Morvhan, fanning to bring a challenge around an old rival toward soft prey, were arrested by a thing that made no sense in any grammar they had. The soft thing had walked asterisk toward them. The soft thing had made itself defenseless on purpose asterisk, in the open, with nothing between it and 36 deaths, and it was asterisk not afraid asterisk. And an animal, Oru had learned this from the girl, from the warhound, from the young scout, from all of it. An animal cannot process fearlessness in prey because fearlessness is not a thing prey does. Prey runs, prey freezes. Prey does everything except walk toward you with its arms open and its heart slow, and a creature that does that is, by the oldest logic there is, not prey, which leaves only 2 other things it can be, a rival or a member of the pack, and it plainly was not a rival because it was the size of a meal. Which left one thing, and behind the small fearless thing stood an old gray apex, vast and calm and immovably at home, that had claimed this soft, impossible creature as its own. The wild alpha looked at the girl with her arms open. It looked at the old gray animal behind her, and Oru watched the oldest calculation on the flat run behind its forward-set eyes, the same calculation the young scout had run and lost. A territory held this calmly, by an apex this old, with a claim this strange and this certain, has been held a long time, and will cost more to take than the taking is worth. The alpha made a sound, low, long, grinding, and it was not the claim any more. But the band was 36, and one of them was young and did not yet know how to lose. The young one broke from the left flank of the band, and it broke fast, and it broke the way the young of any apex line break. Not at the old gray animal holding the neck, which every older instinct in the band had already conceded, but past it, around it, at the soft, warm, undefended thing beyond. Because a young predator that has never been beaten does not yet believe in the word asterisk around, and the walls of Cold Hero and the 200 lives behind them looked. To a young Morvhan that had ridden the herd down every season of its short life, like exactly the sort of easy killing the funnel had always provided. It came off the flank in a gray blur, low, going wide of biscuit, aimed at the gap between the old animal and the high rocks, aimed at the open ground that led to the walls, and Oru's forelimbs clamped on the rail and his voice came out of him as a click of pure animal alarm. And along the wall of Cold Hero 200 coalition personnel surged and cried out, and Commander Vale's sentinels came up with their rifles a third and final time. "Down," Ren said. She did not shout it. Oru's drone caught it clean, one flat hard syllable thrown back over her shoulder at the wall without her turning her head, and it was not for the young Morvhan and it was not for Biscuit. It was for the sentinels. "Do not fire." And the sentinels, because it was the 5th day and they believed her now more than they believed their own hands, did not fire, and it was the second most disciplined thing the garrison of Cold Hero ever did, and it saved every one of them, because a rifle shot in that dawn would have turned 35 held-back deaths into 35 that had a reason. And Biscuit moved. Oru's recording, played at its slowest, showed it as 3 frames. In the first, the old gray animal stood at the neck of the funnel, calm, its weight easy, the girl 3 steps ahead of it with her arms still open. In the second, it was not there. In the third, it was between the young Morvhan and the gap to the walls, having crossed 60 meters of open ground in the time the young one took to cross 15, and the 2 gray shapes came together in the dust below the high rocks, and then Oru's drone, which he had angled high and wide precisely because Ilanth had told him to keep the record well, and a well-kept record does not linger where it should not, held on the whole flat and not on the meeting of the 2 animals. And so the record of Cold Hero Station shows the band, and the girl and the wall, and the dawn, and at the edge of the frame a rise of dust below the high rocks where the old apex and the young challenger came together, and it shows the dust settle. And it does not show what happened inside it. Because what happened inside it happened the way everything the Morvhan did happened fast and complete and once. When the dust settled, one gray shape stood, and it was the old one, and it was already turning away, already walking back toward the neck of the funnel and the small pink creature waiting there. Unhurried, its head level, no different in its bearing than it had been before, as though it had attended to a small necessary thing, and was returning to the matter that actually held its attention, which was the girl. The young one did not rise. Oru's record does not show why, and Oru never once, in all the years of telling it, described the why, because he had angled the drone high on purpose, and because some restraints a person keeps not for the manual but for himself. The band saw. That was what mattered. 35 wild Morvhan watched the old gray animal cross the flat and answer the one challenge that had come, once, cleanly, and return to its claimed ground without so much as a change in its stride. And they understood the sentence it had spoken in the dust below the rocks better than any coalition ever would, because it was written in the only language they had all been fluent in since before the coalition had a word for them. This ground is held. It is held by one who does not have to hurry, test it, and learn the cost. There is no second telling. The old wild alpha, 40 meters off, lowered its head all the way to the dust. It was the alpha's surrender that turned the band, and the alpha surrendered not to force, but to the thing the force had been in service of, which was the calm. Because the old gray animal holding the neck had not charged the band. It had not roared them off, not spread and challenged and driven at them, not done any of the things an apex does when it is defending a kill or a mate or a fear. It had stood, calm, immovable, and let the herd stream past on both sides of it untouched, and it had answered exactly one challenge and answered it once and returned to calm. And that, Oru understood, watching the alpha's head go down into the dust, was the most unanswerable claim of all. Any animal can hold ground it is afraid to lose. Only the true owner of a place holds it without fear. The old wild alpha had come down the funnel expecting to find prey, or empty ground, or at worst a rival defending a fear it could exploit. It had found instead an old apex standing over a soft-claimed creature with the bone-deep, unbothered calm of a thing that has already decided how the morning ends, and ends fine. And there is no fighting a calm like that, because a calm like that means the fight is already over and you are simply the last one to know. The alpha lowered its head to the dust, and behind it in a ragged wave, the band lowered theirs, 35 wild Morphon bowing their vast gray heads in the gray dawn on the open flat. And then the alpha rose and turned and led the band wide around the neck of the funnel, around the high rocks, around the old gray animal and the small pink creature and the walls of Cold Hero and the 211 lives behind them, out onto the eastern flats where the last of the herd was streaming. Where the food was, where the migration had always meant to go before a station had been built in its road by people who did not read weather. The band went around. They took most of the day to pass. 35 Morphon, and behind them, the tail of a herd 10,000 strong, a whole living season of the deep flats pouring past a kilometer to the east under the climbing sun, and the walls of Cold Hero held not one animal back, because not one animal came to test them, because the road was known now to be held, and a thing that is known to be held is a thing you go around. By noon, the sound of the world moving had begun to fade eastward. By late afternoon, the dust was a haze on the eastern horizon, where it had been on the northern one at dawn. And the neck of the funnel, north of the walls, where the whole balance of the day had stood, held only two figures in the long gold light. An old gray animal, lying now in the dust with its chin on its forelimbs, and a girl sitting against its flank with her eyes closed and her face turned up to the sun, both of them, for the first time in a day and a night, resting. Oru went out to them. He should not have. The manual was clear, and the doctrine Toll had written was clear, and every instinct Oru had ever been raised with screamed at the cartographic auxiliary, second class, not to walk out alone across open ground toward a resting Morphon. But Ilanth had said the record needed him alive, and the record was kept, and Oru found that there was a thing he needed to do that had nothing to do with the record at all. And so he powered down the drone and climbed off the wall and walked out through the neck of the funnel in the gold afternoon light, alone, toward the deadliest animal in the surveyed galaxy and the girl asleep against its side. The Morphon opened one forward eye as he approached. Oru stopped. His throat sac went flat. The old gray head did not lift. The eye regarded him for a long moment. The eye of the thing that was 3 characters in every manual. Do not asterisk. The eye that 31 Coalition dead had been the last to see. And then, because the small pink creature slept easy against its flank and was not afraid and had not woken, the eye closed again, and the old animal let out a long, slow breath through the great architecture of its jaw, and rumbled, low, the good sound, the purr. And Oruvas Kasum stood in the gold light beside the two of them, and understood that he had been permitted. Ren stirred. She squinted up at him. Oru, she said. She had learned his name somewhere along the days. He had never told it to her. You came out here. I came out here, Oru agreed. His translator made it sound calmer than he was. Brave, she said, and closed her eyes again and leaned her head back against the flank of the animal. Or you finally figured out he's not going to do anything as long as I'm calm. A pause. Which is the same thing out here. Bravery. It's just being calm on purpose when the world wants you to run. That's all it ever was. She yawned hugely, covering it with one dust-colored sleeve. My mother could have told your whole coalition that. Nobody would have talked to her at dinner either. Oru sat down in the dust, a careful distance from the great gray flank, and after a moment the old animals rumbled deepened to include him, and the three of them sat in the gold light of the eastern passing migration. And for a while none of them said anything at all, and it was, Oru would think for the rest of his life, the finest afternoon he ever spent. The coalition, having survived the thing it could not survive, immediately set about the business it was actually good at, which was arguing over what had happened. The argument began that same evening in the command hab, and it began badly, because Prefect Davin Ashatro had spent a career learning that the way you survived a near catastrophe was to control the record of it before the record controlled you, and he came into the hab already shaping the language. The migration had passed. The station had held. The corridor could now be surveyed on the far side of the season. These were the facts that mattered, and the facts that mattered could be filed as a coalition success. A difficult sight, a strategic hold, the Survey Corps prevailing against a sovereign class hazard through discipline and nerve. Discipline and nerve, Ilanth Corsaid repeated from the far end of the table, and she did not raise her voice, and Oru, standing witness against the wall, thought that she and the girl had that in common and that it was the most dangerous thing either of them owned. Whose prefect? The garrison held its position, the command structure. The garrison held its fire, Ilanth said, 3 times, on the order of a 23-year-old environmental auxiliary whose contract you terminated and whose removal you ordered by force, an order that a coalition marshal refused on the grounds that carrying it out would have gotten us all killed, which prefect, the record now shows conclusively, it would have. She laid her gray hands flat on the table. You want to file this as discipline and nerve. I am the registrar of this incident, and I am telling you what I am going to file it as, so that you can decide tonight whether you would like to be on the right side of my findings or merely in them. The prefect was quiet. Around the table Vale, Toll, the Marshal Sethais with his short, honest refusal already in the file, no one spoke for him. I am going to find, Ilanth said, that the coalition survived Cold Hero not because of its protocols but in spite of them. That every framework we brought to this world, the threat index, the beast control directorate, the orbital sanitation doctrine, the removal authority of the sector office, every one of them, applied as written, would have ended in the deaths of everyone behind those walls. And that the 211 personnel of this station are alive tonight because one deathworld auxiliary, whom none of you would sit beside at dinner, understood a thing about the calm holding of ground that 10,000 years of coalition doctrine had never once learned. She let it sit. That is my finding, Prefect. You may associate yourself with it, or you may stand against it. But you will not soften it because I was on the wall and so was the record, and the record is kept well. She looked at Oru when she said it. Oru inclined his head. Davin Ashatro looked down at his own sharp hands for a long moment. Then he did the thing that Oru would in the end respect him for, and it cost the prefect more than the wall had. You will add 1 line to your findings, he said. You will find that the prefect of the Cold Hero project ordered the removal of the auxiliary by force, that this order was wrong, that it would have killed us all, and that the prefect stayed on the wall to see the consequence of his error accounted and did not run. He met the registrar's gray eyes. I do not ask you to make me look well. I ask you to make me look accurate. That is the only mercy I have any standing left to request. Ilanth considered him. That, she said, I will do. They tried to give Wren a commendation. She would not take it. The offer came up through the sector office within a week. A coalition citation for distinguished service. The kind of thing that came with a ribbon and a stipend and a line in a record. The coalition's highest instrument for turning a thing it did not understand into a thing it could pin to a chest and stop thinking about. Commander Vale brought it to her himself, in the yard, which was the correct courtesy, and Wren read the citation standing on her flat feeding rock with Biscuit's head on her boot, exactly as she had read the termination order. And Oru, who was there because he was always there now, watched her hand it back. "No," she said, "but thank you genuinely, it's kind." Auxiliary. Vale was, by now, a changed animal. The 40 years of folded small career had come partly unfolded on the wall at dawn, and there was something almost gentle in the old sentinel's flat translated voice. "You held the neck of the funnel against a migratory band. You saved 211 lives. The Coalition wishes to recognize it." "Let it." "You want to recognize it, don't drop a strike on the next one." Wren scratched Biscuit's jaw. "That's the recognition I'd take. There's another band on the far side of the flats, and there's Morvhan on half the deathworlds your survey corps has ever marked do not and turned around and left. They're not the deadliest thing in the galaxy, Commander. They're just the loneliest apex on a lot of empty worlds, and every single time your people met one, they ran, and the running told the animal it was right to be alone." She looked at the old gray shape at her feet. "He wasn't a monster. He was a widhor nobody had ever sat down next to. That's all he ever was. And you had a whole directorate built to kill him, and not one person in it who'd ever thought to just not be afraid." She handed the citation back. "So no, I don't want a ribbon. I want you to write that part down. The part where the deadliest thing in the galaxy just needed somebody to not run. Give that to the next survey corps instead of the manual that says do not. That's the only medal I'd know what to do with." Vale took the citation back. He looked at it. Then he looked at the old gray animal with its chin on the girl's boot, purring low enough to shiver the dust, and the commander of the Cold Hero garrison did a thing that was in no protocol at all. He lowered his head, the small formal bow of a sentinel to a superior officer, to the animal, and then to the girl. "I will write it down," he said. "Auxiliary Alcott, I will write down every word." It was Registrar Ilanth Kor said, who understood what to do with what Wren had said, because understanding what to do with things was the whole of what a registrar was, and because she had spent her career filing the universe and had just watched the universe refuse to be filed, and she was not a woman to waste a lesson that expensive. Her findings, when she filed them, ran to 400 pages, and they closed the incident, and they were the strangest document the Coalition Oversight Branch had produced in 400 years, and their central finding was not about the Morvhan at all. It was about the Coalition. "The threat," Ilanth wrote in the passage that would be quoted on 9 Worlds, "was never the animal. The animal was, throughout, exactly what the girl said it was, an apex predator, alone on an empty world that had never in its life met a creature which did not flee it, and had drawn from a lifetime of fleeing the only conclusion an animal can draw, which is that it is alone and always will be. The threat was us. The threat was 10,000 years of a coalition that met every apex it could not defeat by running from it and marking it do not asterisk, and by doing so taught every apex in the surveyed galaxy that the only relationship possible between it and a sapient was terror. We did not make the Morvhan deadly. We made it lonely, and then we called the loneliness the deadliest thing in the galaxy, and we were, in a sense we will be some time reckoning with, correct, for there is nothing in the surveyed galaxy deadlier than a powerful thing that has been taught it will always be alone. The auxiliary Alcott did not tame the animal. She simply declined, alone among us, to teach it that lesson one more time. And the animal, offered for the first time in its life a creature that would not run, did what any living thing does when it is finally offered the thing it had stopped hoping for. It stopped being alone. Everything the Coalition witnessed at Cold Hero followed from that single refusal, and the Coalition would be wise to understand that the refusal, and not the animal, is the thing worth studying, because the refusal is a technique, and the technique can be taught, and the girl has offered to teach it, and we have exactly one chance not to be too proud to learn. The Coalition was, briefly, too proud to learn. Then the recording circulated, Oru's recording, kept well, 4 seasons of it, the horn and the yawn and the naming and the neck of the funnel at dawn. and the Coalition watched a 23-year-old from a deathworld walk toward 36 of the deadliest animals in the galaxy with her arms open, and stopped them. And it turned out that 10,000 years of pride weighed less than one recording of a thing everyone had believed impossible, kept well by a clerk nobody talked to at dinner. They built the school. They built it at Cold Hero, because Cold Hero was where the ground was, and where the old gray animal was, and where the girl would not leave the old gray animal, so the school came to the girl. The Beast Control Directorate was renamed, over Grishoda Toll's strenuous and touching objection that the old name had 41 pages of good doctrine attached to it, the Apex Relations Corps, and its first field manual was Toll's Annex, expanded now to 200 pages, its first principle unchanged from the day Wren had dictated it in the yard. The technique cannot be performed by the fearful. The calm is not a tool the handler uses. The calm is the handler. There is no other instruction. And its instructors, the first class of them, came out to Cold Hero to learn from the only person in the surveyed galaxy who had ever done the thing the manual described. And Wren taught them the way she taught everything, which was badly and impatiently and with long silences, and by making them sit in the yard until they stopped being afraid, which for most of them took months, and for some of them never took at all, and those ones she sent home kindly. Because the manual was right, and the fearful could not be taught. Aru stayed, of course Aru stayed. He was the keeper of the record, and the record was not finished, and besides, he had discovered somewhere in the 4 seasons that a cartographic auxiliary second class who had once fanned his ledgers across a platform in terror was now a creature who could walk out across open ground and sit down beside the deadliest animal in the galaxy in the gold afternoon light, and be permitted, and rumbled at. And that this was not a thing he was willing to give up to go back to being a person nobody talked to at dinner. He requested a transfer to the Apex Relations Corps as its first registrar of record. It was granted. He kept the record. He kept it well. The question the Coalition could not stop asking, in the season after Cold Hero, was the one Ilanth had folded quietly into the middle of her 400 pages, where the schedule-minded would be least likely to notice it, and the thoughtful would find it and not sleep. If the girl could do this, what else could her people do, and why did we ask them for so little? Because the Coalition had asked humanity for very little. That was the part that came out slowly, in the reckoning, and stung the worst. Humanity had come into the Coalition's charts 3 years before Cold Hero, a young species off a cluster of deathworlds, unremarkable in fleet tonnage, unremarkable in industry, a minor signatory whose worlds the Survey Corps had marked with the same clipped notation they gave to Cold Hero and Havery, and every other place a sensible person did not go. Deathworld, restricted, environmental hazard, general. And the Coalition, meeting a minor species from a set of hazard-marked worlds, had done the thing a large old institution does with a small new one. It had asked for the cheap thing. It had asked for environmental auxiliaries, soil core diggers, buoy readers, people willing to be posted to the sites nobody else would take, because those were the postings the Coalition had trouble filling, and here was a species that seemed, unaccountably, not to mind them. They had not minded them because, to a human off a deathworld, a Coalition hazard site was a holiday. That was the joke underneath the whole affair, and it took the Coalition an embarrassingly long time to get it. Cold Hero Flats, with its single apex predator and its seasonal migration, was rated by the Coalition as one of the most dangerous postings in the sector. To Wren Alcott, who had grown up on a world where the grass had teeth and the smallest predator could open a supply drum, Cold Hero was quiet. She had said so, that first week, to the mess she was not welcome in. I came here for the quiet. She had meant it. The deadliest animal in the surveyed galaxy had been, to her, a lonely widower on an unusually peaceful world, and she had befriended it partly out of kindness and partly out of the specific boredom of a deathworld child on a posting where nothing else was trying to kill her. The Coalition had asked humanity for the cheap thing, and humanity had sent, without fanfare, without a fleet, without a single soldier, the 4 people who had answered the posting. And one of them had walked out and named the deadliest animal in the galaxy on her 12th day because she was bored and it was sad. And somewhere in a records office on a coalition core world, a committee that had spent 3 years filing humanity under asterisk minor signatory, environmental support sat looking at Oru Kasum's recording and understood, all at once and much too late, that they had been reading the manifest exactly backward, that the coalition had not been generously employing a small species from some hazard worlds, but had been, without knowing it, playing host to the auxiliaries of a people who found the coalition's deathworlds restful, and that the 4 soil core diggers on the Cold Hero project were not humanity's contribution to the coalition's frontier. They were humanity's asterisk tourists. "We asked them for people who wouldn't mind the dangerous postings," said a coalition delegate, in a session on a core world that Oru heard about only third hand, "and we have just now understood what it means that a species exists which does not mind them." A long pause in the record of the session. "We did not send soldiers to the frontier. We staffed it with clerks and auxiliaries because we believed the frontier was a place of hardship to be endured. And they came and endured it and found it a place of rest, and the first time one of their rest postings produced the deadliest animal we had ever catalogued, one of their auxiliaries yawned and named it and taught it to sit." Another pause. "I would like the committee to sit for a moment with the following question. If that is what they send to dig our soil, what precisely have we been imagining we were doing when we imagined we were the ones being generous?" The committee sat with it. The committee, by all accounts, sat with it for some time. The other 3 humans of the Cold Hero project turned out to be, individually, unremarkable, and collectively, the most quietly unsettling thing the coalition had encountered in 400 years, precisely because they were unremarkable. Oru interviewed them for the record, because the record was his charge, and because Yawned wanted humanity understood and not merely feared. There was Dabo Ren, a heavyset man in his 50s who ran the water reclamation plant and kept a small hard-shelled earth animal he called a tortoise in a crate under his bunk, and who, when Oru asked him whether he had been frightened during the migration, thought about it seriously for a while and said, "Nah, Ren had it," as though that settled it. As though Ren had it were a complete account of 211 lives balanced on the neck of a funnel at dawn. There was Sunya Kai, a wiry woman who maintained the buoy array Ren read every morning, and who had spent the migration night not on the wall with the terrified garrison but asleep in her bunk, because, she explained, there was nothing for her to do until morning, and a person should sleep when there's nothing to do. And there was a boy, 18, on his first posting off-world, named Tio, who dug soil cores alongside Ren and who had cried once during the migration and been embarrassed about it, and whom Ren had sat with on the wall and talked to low and unbroken all through the worst of the night in the same contact register she used on the animal, because, she said later when Oru asked, "He's a pup. First time off a deathworld and the deathworld comes to find him anyway. Somebody had to be his calm. That's all it ever is. Somebody has to be the still one and then everybody else can be scared safely." She had shrugged. "My mother was mine, I'm his, he'll be somebody's, that's the whole trick, there's no other trick." Oru wrote it all down. Nah, Ren had it. A person should sleep when there's nothing to do. Somebody has to be the still one. 4 humans on a hazard posting, unremarkable, ordinary, boring, and every one of them carrying, without effort, without pride, without apparent awareness that it was worth remarking on, the one thing 10,000 years of coalition doctrine had never learned to manufacture. The flat, bone-deep, deathworld-bred refusal to panic, the calm that was not a tool but a self, the still center that a frightened world could organize itself around. The coalition had 100 weapons that could kill a Morvhan, and not one soldier who could sit down beside one. Humanity did not have a single weapon that mattered, and it had produced 4 people who could do it without thinking, and a whole civilization of them behind those 4, On a cluster of worlds, the coalition had marked *Do not go. They are not stronger than us, Ilenth wrote in the last of her 400 pages. They are not faster or better armed or more numerous. In every measure the coalition has ever valued, they are minor. They have one thing we do not, and it is not a thing you can build or buy or breed into a warhound. They come from places that eat the ones who flinch, and so they have unlearned the flinch, all of them, as a condition of having survived to adulthood. That is the whole of it. That is the entire human advantage, and it is total, and we will not close the gap by building a bigger gun, because the gap was never about the gun. The girl held the neck of the funnel with her arms open and empty. We would be wise to understand that she was not being brave. She was being ordinary, human ordinary, and that the most dangerous thing in the surveyed galaxy is not the Morvhan, and never was. It is a species that finds our deadliest worlds restful, and sends its bored auxiliaries to dig our soil, and does not think the thing it did at Cold Hero was worth writing home about. The Apex Relations Corps spread the way water spreads, which is to say along the paths that were already there, and had only needed the water. Within 2 seasons there were Morvhan-marked worlds across the sector receiving core handlers instead of orbital sanitation requests, and the handlers went out onto the empty flats of those worlds not with weapons, but with the 200-page manual and the first principle, and most of them, a long apprenticeship in the yard at Cold Hero sitting still until they stopped being afraid. They did not tame the Morvhan of those worlds the way Wren had tamed Biscuit. Most of them never bonded an animal at all, and the manual was clear that bonding was neither the goal nor reliably possible, that the goal was smaller and stranger and more useful, simply to stop teaching the apex predators of the galaxy that sapience could only ever be terror. To meet the lonely thing at the edge of the flat and for once not run, to let it learn there was another way to be. Some of the animals softened over seasons. Some never did, and the Corps left those ones their flats and their solitude and simply stopped marking them do not asterisk, and started marking them, in the new notation Toll had devised over the objection of every traditionalist in the branch, not alone by choice, approach with the method, or not at all. And on the worlds where it worked, the thing that came of it was not a weapon and not an asset and not a coalition military Morvhan, whatever the sleek sentinel handler had once imagined. It was quieter than that, and it changed more. It was the slow unterrifying of the galaxy's apex predators, one calm handler at a time, and the slow understanding, spreading through the coalition alongside it, that the frameworks they had trusted, the threat index, the buffer distances, the whole grim architecture of do not, had been, all along, less a description of the universe than a record of their own inability to stop being afraid. Wren did not travel to those worlds. Wren stayed at Cold Hero with the old gray animal and taught the ones who came to her, and read the buoys every morning because it was still, technically, her job, and she was still, technically, an environmental auxiliary, and she declined every promotion the coalition tried to attach to her with the same mild patience she declined the citation. She was, when the Corps historians came to write it all down, difficult to write about, because she refused to be more than she was. She had not saved the galaxy. She had befriended a lonely animal because she was bored and it was sad, and held a line one dawn because 200 people needed someone to be calm, and taught a few handlers to sit still, and read the weather off some buoys, and that was all, and she got faintly irritated when anyone tried to make it into more. "It's not a saga," she told Oru once when he showed her a draft of the record he was keeping. "You keep writing it like it's a saga. It's a girl and her dog, that's the whole story. Everybody's got one. Mine's just bigger than most." She scratched the old gray jaw. Biscuit, grayer now, older, rumbled and leaned into her hand. "Write that down. It's a girl and her dog. If you write anything fancier than that, you've missed it." Oru wrote it down. He also quietly kept the 400 pages because he was a registrar of record and because he had been on the wall at dawn, and he knew the difference between what a thing feels like from the inside and what it was. From the inside, it was a girl and her dog. From the wall, it had been the night the coalition learned it had been afraid of the wrong thing for 10,000 years. Both were true. He kept both. He had learned that from her too. 4 seasons after the migration, the horn of Cold Hero Station sounded again, and the newest arrival on the flat did exactly what Oru had done the first time, which was try to save something breakable and forget how to run. His name was Vesig, and he was Thesson, and he was a cartographic auxiliary second class. The coalition had, with the unlovely tidiness of large institutions, sent Oru's own replacement to his own old posting, now that Oru had risen to registrar of record, and he had been on the flat for 6 days and had heard the stories and believed none of them, because the stories were impossible, and Vesig was a sensible young clerk who knew the manual and knew that the manual said do not. So when the horn went, on his 6th morning, Vesig grabbed the census ledgers off the platform and turned to run for the shelter ramp, and found that there was no shelter ramp anymore, because they had taken it out 2 seasons back, and that nobody was running. Nobody was running. That was the thing that stopped him, the same thing that had stopped Oru 4 seasons before, except inverted. The whole station going still instead of the whole station coming apart. The Balamic cooks had come to the mess window. The corps trainees had come out into the yard. Commander Vale's garrison, smaller now, ceremonial mostly, the walls long since understood to be beside the point, had come up onto the ramparts not with rifles, but the way people come up to watch a thing they love, and every one of them had turned to look north, where the horn was pointing, where a gray shape had appeared on the horizon and was coming down across the flats toward the station at an unhurried walk. "That's the horn for a Morvhan," Vesig said to no one with the ledgers still clutched to his chest. "That's the manual says." "The manual's old," said the woman beside him. She had come up onto the platform without his noticing, a plain human woman, older now than the recordings, with gray coming into the hair. She still clearly cut herself in the same dust-colored coat. "We keep the horn because the new ones like Tio out there ought to learn the sound, and because he likes it." She nodded north at the gray shape. "He knows it means he's home. Watch." She put 2 fingers to her mouth and whistled 2 notes. Lo, the same scrap of tune, 4 seasons worn smooth now, and the gray shape on the horizon broke into that pour of impossible speed, the single gray line drawn across the noon light, and Vesig made the sound his species makes twice in a life and dropped his ledgers, and they fanned across the platform, grating exactly as another clerk's had 4 seasons before, and the woman glanced down at them, and then at him with something that was almost, but not quite a smile. "You'll want to pick those up," Ren Alcott said, not unkindly. "He steps on paperwork, doesn't mean anything by it. He just doesn't watch where the big feet go." The gray line resolved at the fence into 6 meters of weathered slate, grayer at the muzzle now, slower to stop than the recordings, and it came over the flattened place in the perimeter where the fence had never been rebuilt because there was no longer any point, and it crossed the yard to the woman and lowered its vast old head, and she caught the jaw in both hands and leaned her forehead against it. "There he is," she said. "There's my idiot. Good walk." The rumble came up through the platform grating into the soles of Vesig's feet, the deep engine-idle purr of the deadliest animal in the surveyed galaxy, and the young clerk stood frozen with his ledgers at his feet, and Ren looked at him over the great gray head and said, "You're allowed to breathe. Genuinely. Nothing on this whole flat is going to hurt you as long as somebody's calm, and I'm calm, so." She scratched the old jaw. "Breathe, clerk, it gets easier. I promise it gets easier." Vesig breathed. It did not get easier that day. But it got easier over the seasons, the way it had gotten easier for Oru, the way it got easier for all of them. And within a year the young Thesson could sit in the yard in the gold light beside the old gray animal and be rumbled at and permitted, and would not have traded it for any posting in the coalition. And Oru, registrar of record, keeper of the 400 pages, logged the whole small, ordinary miracle of it and thought, as he always thought, that the finest thing the coalition had ever done was ask the wrong species for the cheap thing and get, in return, an education it had never known it needed. The prefect came back once, near the end. Davin Ashatro had gone on from Cold Hero to other projects, and by all accounts, had never fully recovered his old certainty, which those who knew him counted a loss and Ilanth Korsed counted a healing. A man less sure that everything could be reduced to arithmetic was, she maintained, simply a man who had learned to read the fuller ledger. He came back to Cold Hero in his final season of service, an old Corvani now, sharp features gone soft with age, and he came without escort and without mandate, just a retired administrator visiting a place that had unmade and remade him, and he found Wren in the yard where he had always found her, on the flat feeding rock, with the old gray animal's head on her boot. He stood at a careful distance, the way he had learned to 4 seasons and a lifetime ago. "Auxiliary," he said. "Prefect." She did not get up, but she nodded at the crate beside her rock, an invitation, and Davin Ashatro, who had once ordered her removed by force from this exact spot, came and sat down on the crate beside the deadliest animal in the galaxy, stiffly, an old man's care in his joints, and the animal opened one forward eye and regarded him, and because the girl was calm, closed it again. "I read the registrar's findings," the prefect said after a while, "the full 400 pages, including the line I asked her to add." He looked at his own old hands. "She made me accurate. It was not comfortable. It was the most useful discomfort of my life." A pause. "I have spent 4 seasons trying to understand the thing you understood in 11 days, and I have not managed it, and I have made my peace with not managing it, and I came here to ask you one question before I retire, because you are the only person alive who can answer it, and I would like to know before I am done." He turned his soft, old, sharp face to her. "When you walked out to it, that first day, with the horn going and everyone running, were you certain? Did you know it would not kill you? Or did you simply not care?" Wren was quiet for a while. She scratched the old gray jaw. Biscuit rumbled and shifted his weight and settled deeper onto her boot, and the gold light came down across the flat where the fence had never been rebuilt. "Neither," she said finally. "I wasn't certain. And I cared a lot. I had a whole life I wanted to keep living. That's the part everybody gets wrong. They think the calm is not being afraid." She shook her head. "It's not. I was afraid. You're always afraid out on a death world. The world's built to make you afraid. That's the whole point of it. The calm isn't the absence of the fear. The calm is what you do with your hands and your voice and your face while the fear does whatever it's going to do inside you." She looked at the old man. "My mother taught me that before I could walk. You don't wait to stop being afraid, because you never stop being afraid. You just decide the fear doesn't get a vote on how you stand. And an animal can't tell the difference between a person who isn't afraid and a person who's afraid and standing still anyway. Neither can most people actually. Neither could your whole coalition." She patted the great jaw. "So no, I wasn't certain, and I did care, and I walked out there anyway with my hands steady because that's the only brave there is. The rest is just not having practiced." She almost smiled. "You could still learn it, Prefect. You're not too old. Nobody's too old. You just have to be scared and keep your hands still, and one day you notice the animals stopped watching you like prey, and that's it. That's the whole secret. That's the deadliest thing in the galaxy." She scratched the jaw. "A steady hand and somebody worth being calm for." Davin Ashatro looked at the old gray animal for a long time. "A steady hand," he said, "and somebody worth being calm for." "That's it," said Wren. "That's the manual. Everything Toll wrote is just footnotes." The prefect sat with her in the yard until the light went, and then he rose stiffly and inclined his sharp old head to the girl and to the animal, and he went to catch the evening skiff, and he retired, and he died some years later on a core world, and among his effects was found a single page in his own hand, filed nowhere, addressed to no one, on which he had written, "A steady hand and somebody worth being calm for." This is the whole of it. I understood it too late to use it, and in time to be grateful for it. Dar Oru put it in the record. It belonged there. He kept it well. Biscuit lived a long time, for a Morvhan. longer than the manual said they lived, which the core biologists attributed to steady food and unhurried seasons, and Oru attributed to the simpler thing, which was that nothing wears an animal down like being alone, and the old gray creature had not been alone for a single day since an environmental auxiliary put her hand on its jaw and called it a name. He went gray all over in the end. He slowed and he slept more, and the walks out onto the flats got shorter, and there came a season when he did not chase the Habstrut anymore but only watched it go and then looked back at Ren with the mild expectant patience of a thing content to have the option. And she stopped throwing it and sat with him instead in the gold light, and told him he was a good idiot and that somebody had let him get away with everything, which was true, and which had been the saving of him. He died in the yard in the sun with his head on her boot, on an ordinary afternoon, and Ren Alcott sat with him for a long time after, and did not cry where anyone could see, because her mother had not raised a flincher. And then she got up and dug the grave herself, out past the last sensor pylon where the migration split around the high rocks, and would let no one help her, and buried the deadliest animal in the surveyed galaxy in the neck of the funnel. He had held one dawn against 36 of his own kind for the sake of 200 people who had been afraid of him. The coalition wanted to build a monument. Ren said no. She said no the way she said no to everything, mildly and immovably, and instead she set a flat rock over the place. The feeding rock, the one she had dragged into the yard the first week, worn smooth now by 4 seasons of ration protein and a great gray chin, and she carved nothing on it, because there was nothing to carve that would not be fancier than the thing deserved. Oru asked her, once near the end of his own service, what she would have put on it if she had put anything. Ren thought about it. She was old herself by then, gray all through, still in a dust-colored coat, still reading the buoys every morning because it was still her job, and she was still, on every coalition form, an environmental auxiliary, second class. Nothing, she said. He'd hate a fuss. He was somebody's, that's all. That was the whole of him. He was mine and I was his, and for a while nobody was alone, and then he was old and he wasn't afraid and he went to sleep in the sun. She looked out at the flat rock past the last pylon, where the gold light came down the way it always came down on that world, bright and even, hiding nothing. You people spent 10,000 years calling him the deadliest thing in the galaxy, she said. And you were right, I suppose. Out here he was. She almost smiled, the old mild smile that had never quite reached the tired part of her eyes and never would. But I keep telling you. Nobody who ever said that had met my mother's dog. Then she yawned and covered it, and went to read the morning buoys, unhurried, her hands in her pockets. A small, ordinary woman crossing a bright flat where a monster slept under a plain rock she had carved with nothing at all. And Oruvas Kasim, registrar of record, keeper of the 400 pages and the 200 more that came after, watched her go, and wrote none of it down because some things do not belong in the record, even a record kept well. He simply watched her cross the bright ground, unafraid, in the way she had taught a whole coalition to understand at last was the only brave there was, and then he went in out of the sun, and left the flat to the light, and the light to the quiet, and the quiet to the girl and her dog.